So we'll begin this evening's meeting, this work session. I do need to note the absence of Councilman Johnson tonight. He will not be here. So we'll start off with council meeting follow-up. Mr. City Manager, do you have anything that we need to go over from the last council meeting, even though you weren't here? But
Mr. Mayor, not that I'm aware of, sir.
okay, anybody else on council have anything they want to? Councilman Bates.
I know I mentioned about, I went to, Matt Keating's, information on the, property taxes last Wednesday, and y'all asked for me to, send an email to follow up on that. And, I've talked to two of them that asked me to follow up on it, but just to give you guys heads up, it was nothing more information than what we received here. It was the same exact information, so I really didn't have anything to bring back to council or email Ms. Becker and to y'all any more information other than the request. I asked the request again from them about the formula to be sent to Vice Mayor Lutz and Councilman Kathy. They assured me that they were going to send it by the end of Friday. I double checked with that, and they never, my understanding is they never emailed them that formula. And it's just disheartening that you say you're going to do this and you do the complete opposite. So that was disheartening for me. But I just wanted to follow up with everybody regarding that.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Cowboy Skills demo. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Good evening. We have the opportunity today to receive a demonstration from Cowboy Skills, which you can see an apparatus here tonight, and some individuals to help walk us through that. And so if it's pleasing to the council, we'll go ahead and defer that time to our guests.
Good evening.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and council members. Is it okay if I remove my mask?
Absolutely.
A little easier to talk that way. My name is Nick George, and I represent Cowboy Skills. It's a skill game manufacturer that started bringing skill games specific to Wyoming's laws about 2 years ago. I personally have been doing this for 3 years here in Wyoming. We actually had originally started off with another game, and we wound up settling on this one here as far as the one that we found that had all of the things necessary for Wyoming. I'll go through kind of what the machine itself, what kind of signifies what a skill game is versus just a regular slot machine, because that's usually the biggest question that we're asked. So I will start off. I need to put this into demo mode real quick. Okay. So whenever we go to select a game, a couple things that signify what an actual skill game is. On a traditional slot machine, there's no real interaction. Essentially, you just walk up and you push a button and you win or lose. There's a finite amount of winners that are going to be there, and there's going to be a certain amount of losers. With these here, you can always override with the ability of skill. So in a game like this here, you can actually, before you ever put any money in the game, you can actually look and see what the next puzzle is going to be. And looking at this one here, there's not a winner on here. I can move up to a different pay level, and it'll be a different outcome. And maybe it's a winner and maybe it isn't. This one isn't a winner either. The way skill games work, because they're not allowed to have a random number generator, you got to think of them like a deck of cards. So if there's a winner here, there's other cards in the way, and then you just keep drawing off the deck. Now, just because one isn't a winner doesn't mean that you can't win, because like I said before, skill can always override. So you can walk up and hit play on here. Now what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get 3 in a row. So it's pattern recognition as a skill that you're using. So you want to get one of the figures or icons, and you want to have 3 of them that line up. On this one here, there's no obvious winner. So what you can do is you can play the secondary game called Follow Me. Now when you play Follow Me on this one here, we were playing for 80 cents, and now you can win 84 cents. So you can win 105% of your bet back every single time by utilizing skill. Now this game here is the secondary game. It's called Follow Me. It's very similar to like Simon Says. You'll go through 20 rounds of Simon Says. After you complete all of them successfully, then you'll win the 105% of your bet back. What we see more often is actually people will set their phone down and they'll look at it like a phone pad. So this would be 2, 4, 5, 6, 8. And then they just remember 2, 6, 8. Now on this here, as you're playing, if let's say you mess up, you essentially just get the one opportunity. And then sorry you missed that one and you don't get a win. Now, anytime that you come up to play, you can always look at the next puzzle and see what's going to be available to you. We'll show pattern recognition here eventually. Here we go. So here's one where you actually have 2 that can win as long as you place the bonus in the correct position. So on this one here, you can obviously see if you were to put a wild here, then you would have 3 in a row here and 3 in a row here, and you would win on there. But because we're trying to learn here, I'll actually put it in the wrong position. So I put it here, and it shows me that this is the best spot. So it always wants you to try your best, right? Now another thing that's part of the skill concept is whenever you're playing, so if you're looking at these, if you notice all the other times I had 30 seconds to play. Because I'm about to win on the octopus, I have far less time to select the correct spot, which is another added level of skill to that. The game itself is actually really simple. On this here, there's 13 different games. They're basically all the exact same game with a different face on them. Just some people like fishing themed stuff. Some people like war themed stuff. These are more, the graphics aren't that of like a PlayStation or anything like that. So this is more, it's bar entertainment. It's something for someone to sit down. We got to build this last year. The max win is $3,000. The max bet is $3, and the maximum amount of machines that we can have in one location is 4. The thing that honestly, probably the best part about this isn't just the games. For the state's benefit, the back-end software is actually really where this machine kind of sings. So the way that they do the taxes in other states is they actually prepay all of their taxes. In the House Enrolled Act that was just passed, you guys will actually, once the money reaches $1 million at the Gaming Commission, then it'll be broke up. It's 20% total, so 9% of that will go to the cities, towns, and counties. 9% of that goes to the school general fund, and 2% goes to the Gaming Commission for their oversight. So once that goes over that $1 million threshold, you guys will start receiving money. We believe that that'll probably be sometime in September. Not 100% sure once it gets over that $1 million mark. But then once it does, all the cities, towns, and counties will start receiving money from that. The back-end software where I was explaining that's really good, the reason why it's so good is because we actually pay our taxes ahead of time. So we prepay all of our taxes. These machines run off what's called a fill system. And so what happens is, I don't know if you could tell the first, here we'll go to this here. Give you the whole thing, right? Exit demo mode. Whenever you look at this screen, whenever it comes back up, it'll show down in the bottom, it'll say no available plays or must, here, we'll get to it. Okay, so this one here, it says out of plays in the bottom. It's out of plays, that means that right now this game is disabled. If you look, there's no green lights up here, it won't accept any money, the machine is essentially dead in the water. In order to make this machine work, what I would have to do is I would have to purchase one of the plays from Pacematic, that's the actual manufacturer. We would have to purchase a play, and then once we purchase that play, they instantly sweep our account, and they're the one that pays our taxes. So then that way, essentially, I mean, right now that seems to be a big problem that's happening in Wyoming with oil field companies not paying the taxes that are owed afterwards. We prepay every tax before it actually comes up. Our collection software is really nice. I actually currently, I'm from Casper, but I live in Sheridan now. And I have like a bar, Parkman. I don't know if you guys are familiar. It's out in Parkman, Wyoming. There's no internet. In fact, about once a month I have to go out there and change phone lines because they have water in their phone lines and they go bad kind of on a monthly basis. That one there, if it had to be hooked hardline to the internet, it just probably wouldn't work most of the time. Whereas with this here, I can actually go up. For myself, if I'm going to do a collection on the game, if I'm going to add a fill to the game, I can just go up and it'll put up a QR code. I can walk up with my phone, scan it, and it'll automatically send a message back to the manufacturer, my office. So if I have employees doing it, I'll see that they were in there. And hopefully, the Gaming Commission will get this set up on their end as well. It'll basically report directly to the Gaming Commission how much money's gone in it, what games have been played, things like that. But basically, all accounting software is transferred through the QR code system. It's a really ingenious model that's trying to add as much transparency to a market that, to be completely honest, in a lot of other states, what happens is Pace, the company that makes this game, they come in, they bring the games, they try to get legislation, and a lot of times because of the unfamiliarity with it, nothing really gets passed. And then we get people that come in kind of on the back door. They're not as forthcoming with their stuff. So we want to be able to have an avenue for people to be able to look inside of this. There's actually an app that we can give to like the Gaming Commission or law enforcement where they can actually walk up to the game and there's a little number down on the bottom where they can just type that number in and it'll say who owns the game, where it should be, and it's a registration number for the state. So yeah, I guess, and that's the basis of that. Does anybody, my wife's going to come up and explain some of the numbers that we're getting so far. If anybody has any questions for me on the machine itself or gameplay.
Councilman Bates.
So at the beginning, you said the difference between a gambling game and your game, but I didn't really hear what the exact difference is between those two. So if you can explain that maybe more simply for me, I'm not sure if I missed it. And then two, you said once you reach $1 million, 9% will go to the city. That
Cities, towns, and counties.
okay, so that's divided between all. And then how much goes to the school?
9%.
9% as well. And then you guys only take in 2%?
No, sir. So 20% is the tax. 9% goes to the cities, towns, and counties. 9% will go to the school foundation, and then 2% will go to the Gaming Commission for their oversight. The other 80% of the profit that's left over is actually split. Pace takes a small percentage, and then the rest of it is split 50-50 between the location owner and the vendor that puts it in.
Okay, thank you.
So, and then, so as far as the gameplay goes, so it's basically you're just utilizing pattern recognition is the skill that you're using. On a regular slot machine, you would just hit play, and then you would either win or lose. And then you would hit play again and either win or lose. And in Pennsylvania, they actually call it the monkey test. If a monkey can push a button and win, and that's a slot machine. Whereas with these ones here, every single time you have to enact some form of skill every single time in order to win. Albeit somewhat easy. I mean, it's pattern recognition, right? Everyone's been playing tic-tac-toe since they were pretty little. So it's something that comes pretty natural to most of us, but it's a skill nonetheless. So,
Councilman Powell.
I have a related question, sir. It says here that any game of skill must have an independent laboratory report, which is pretty vague language to me. I assume that some independent group has evaluated this particular game and determined that it is a game of skill, and if so, can you describe, do they have some criteria that they use to determine the difference? And then I assume any other company can go through the same process you're going through to get a game approved. But you're right, you started by saying what Councilman Bates just referenced is what is the difference, and I think that is a key question.
Correct. Let's see. So on these here, we have, there is independent gaming lab tests. The independent gaming labs there's like 3 or 4 main ones in the U.S., and they do independent gaming labs for all different states. Usually it's set up more for fairness and not defining skill versus slot. But they can do that. So there's basically 3 of them. Ours went through Farley and Associates is who did our independent gaming lab test. Currently, right now in the state of Wyoming, there's 3 other manufacturers that are legal. There's Cowboy Skills. There's also a company called Gracie and another one called Bankshot. All of them obtained an independent gaming lab report and submitted that to the Gaming Commission. And then the Gaming Commission evaluates from there based off of the statute that was just passed what an actual, whether it's a skill game or not. You have the wording here?
I do.
Okay.
Here.
Okay, so if you look in Enrolled Act 95, page 7, it's XIII. Skill-based amusement games means a game played in exchange for consideration, cash credit, or other things of value on a fixed commercial electronic gaming device in which the bona fide skill of the player, determined by an individual's level of strategy and skill, is a factor in determining the outcome, and for which the player may be awarded a prize or other thing of value for a successful outcome. So if it doesn't adhere to that, there was a few of them that were actually that were in Casper that were out there that they didn't pass muster with the Gaming Commission, so those ones had to be removed from the state.
And I guess I just have one question. You said you could have 4 of these in each location. What locations do you generally put these machines in?
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the basic place we put them in, it's usually bars and clubs. So these are kind of a mainstay for like the Eagles, Elks, American Legion, VFWs, things like that, and just your local mom and pop stores. It was kind of a necessity for us. I've been a vendor for 21 years. I did most of my time right here in Casper. My dad started Wyoming Amusement with David Waylander. And David wound up buying the southern end of the route, and I bought the northern end, and that was how we wound up dividing that. But we traditionally do pool tables, dart machines, jukeboxes. We're actually the members of the group that actually put on the big state pool and dart tournament that are at the Parkway and at the event center every year. And what happened was in 2013, whenever horse racing came in, all of our bars dropped anywhere from 20 to 40%. So where the city thought it was a great thing because they were getting money for the horse racing, and it was supporting an agribusiness, so the rest of the state thought it was a good thing. A lot of the local mom and pop bars were hurt considerably. And so we had to find something that would bring more revenue into those smaller businesses so we wouldn't, honestly, so they wouldn't close their doors. It just so happened I was really lucky and bought my dad out the same year they came out. So I bought my dad's route in Sheridan, and then all of a sudden we lost 40%. So he wasn't really thinking I was doing a great job at first. But then when we started looking at the numbers for every single location, we had one location that had a historical horse racing terminal in it, and that one was up like 400%. Everything else was down quite a bit. And so it was kind of a necessity. So we started seeing skill games being advertised to us at our local trade shows, or the national trade show, the one in Las Vegas, and we just thought that we had to have something that could help us to at least stay competitive. So we went and talked with a few. The first year we went, there was 4 skill game manufacturers. By the 4th year, right now, there's like 27. So every year there was just more and more people that were putting out more machines. And so We'd originally went with another company. It's actually a company called Vanilla, the same one that got banned here. The Attorney General wrote an unfavorable opinion on them. And we had originally went with those, and they had told us, oh no, these pass muster, they're perfect, everything's great about them. And then whenever he wrote that, we noticed that they just kind of quit returning our calls, and they really didn't want anything to do with us. So we had to basically ship all those games out of state because they weren't considered legal here and buy all new. So for us vendors, it was kind of a tough road to hoe because it just seemed like we started off with something. We got it to the point where it was almost paid off, and then the Attorney General came in and said, oh no, actually those don't pass muster with the state itself. We then went with this company, and you know, kind of the rest is history. But it was kind of out of necessity that we did that. So,
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed in the summary of HB 171 or Enrolled Act 95, they have a violators will be guilty of a misdemeanor with a fine of not more than $10,000. And this is probably a question for you folks down there. Misdemeanor, I'm assuming that this goes right to the state because we can only charge, what is it, $750 to make it a misdemeanor? Okay, so this money just goes to the state. And is there some idea where that money goes to the state?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I honestly have no idea. So I was one of the lobbyists that tried to help get this passed, but the problem was we had an entire section devoted specifically to skill games, as far as more stipulations, things like that, an exact,
Okay.
you know, but that was removed kind of at the last minute. So I got to be honest, I really don't know where it goes. In fact,
Bottom line is it ends up in the state's coffers.
yes, sir.
Okay.
And this is my wife, Leslie.
Thank you, guys. Leslie George here, Mr. Mayor and council members. Pleasure to meet your acquaintance. I hope you can hear me all right. I just wanted to frame up Cowboy Skill across the state. So Nick and Aaron Sheridan and David Waylanders here in Casper, there's 8 operators independently operating our businesses in a service capacity providing those services to territories that all signed up with Cowboy Skill. So we're not just one enterprise or monopoly, we are 8 separate businesses in the state. Then we've been here, many of us, for many years. On the House Enrolled Act summary, there were responsible parameters that Cowboy Skill was operating on that we got codified into statute, such as the limits of amount that you can wager. The payout is up to $3,000. For per establishment, players must be 21, and the last regulation, in my opinion, is that these games must pass muster with the definition of skill. So to be in these widespread establishments, they also need to have these safe, responsible parameters at this time. We are seeking longevity. You see at the end, there's a sunset date next summer, and the state will be deciding the outlook going forward. To talk to you, Councilman Hopkins, about what does some of this revenue stream possibly mean for the city of Casper, I wanted to do a quick rundown here. So as Nick had said, the 20% tax it's racing towards $1 million as we speak. We began being authorized and paying taxes approximately mid-May, and we've been doing that now for just a couple months, but we had a commission meeting last Friday where they gave us some reporting on not just us, but the other operators in our space. So as of June 28th, the Wyoming gaming account is at approximately $552,000. $152,000 roughly is license fees. All of us that had to pay, it's $50 per machine, it's the $2,500 per operator, and it's $250 per location. So that was $152,000. So far, in just the short term that I described, 20% tax statewide is $400,000 roughly. So we need another 500. Let's see. So the 20% tax is coming in at a rate currently from May 11th through June 28th at a rate of $8,176 per day. For a quick projection for you, we know that daily rate is a little low. We're just reopening after coronavirus. One of the operators was not beginning to pay taxes until June 1. So for this short-term projection, I will assume a 20% tax revenue to the state will continue to come in at a rate of $10,000 per day. So that topple should happen, the $1 million mark, about mid-next month, mid-August. So in 3 months, we will have reached that $1 million. So going forward after that, the 20% no longer goes directly to the commission, and it is broke down the way that we just talked about. So it's 9, 9, and 2, or of the 20%, that's 45%, 45%, and 10. So 10% to the gaming commission account for their regulatory operations, 45% to the school foundation account, and then 45% split evenly with local governments between the municipality and the county that they operate in. So projection forward from August 11 through the end of this year, there's 142 days statewide. That estimates 1.4 million. The commission does have, right now in the state, 836 commission-approved games in operation. In Natrona County, there's approximately 106 games. That's not just Cowboy Skill, that's our competitors too. Casper, the city, has about 64. Other municipalities in Natrona have about 42. So based off of number of games and population, we believe from August 11th through the end of the year that specifically Natrona County should receive, let's see, that tax revenue is $195,000, broke down by Casper. Natrona County is $118,000, and then other municipalities in Natrona County is $77,000. So of Natrona County, Casper's tax revenue, that's that 40% of the 20% that I'm talking about, 118,000. Okay, it's going to be split. Did I just speak twice? Let me get clear here. So of that 118,000 of the 20% that's coming to Casper, that is split the three ways. Now I'm getting into the breakdown, I apologize. So the 118, 10% will go to that gaming commission at 11,000, 45 school foundation, 53, and then local and county will receive 45% split evenly, so that's 53,000. Approximately 26 is the projection for the city to receive by year's end, 26,000, and also additionally, Natrona would receive 26,000 based off of Casper alone. Of course, there's also the other municipalities in Natrona at a rate of 77 that would break down and also go to Natrona as well. Next year going forward, if we continue this, and I assume that the projection of daily state tax base revenue off that 20% would maybe inflate to 12,000 per day, I think is likely and probable, then I would look at next year for the first half of the year, which we are currently legislated the first half of the year, that breakdown for Casper, just this chunk, would be about $40,000 to the city and $40,000 to Natrona. That's first half of the year. Another additional growth of the next 6 months, and we're on a growth curve. I think it's safe to say that next year, calendar year, it would be $90,000 to $100,000 to the city and $90,000 to $100,000 additionally to the county based on Casper alone. So that's my rough. If you have any questions, please. Yeah. Thank you for your time and my chicken scratch explanation.
So did I hear you right? So you're projecting to hit your $1 million mark next month, and
Approximately August 11th. I think that the Gaming Commission will hit their million and then those will begin.
did you originally say it was September?
Nick did, and I wanted to correct the record.
Okay.
I think 3 months we get there.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Powell.
Thank you. Several months ago, Chief McFeeters described some enforcement challenges he was having with the games that were being placed in our local bars and taverns, and some of the challenges with law enforcement. And I wonder if we should ask Chief to come up and ask if this statute has alleviated some of those concerns and made it easier to enforce these laws. Thank you.
Chief?
Councilman Powell, Council. The statute that was enacted by our legislature, the primary benefit of that statute created the Gaming Commission. And that takes a lot of the problems that we were facing, you know, which games are legal, which ones aren't, which ones have skills involved, which ones are gambling machines. It took all of that away. It puts that onus on the Gaming Commission. So to that extent, it has made it easier for us. We're still, you know, the Gaming Commission's getting fired up, if you will, getting all of their processes in place, their policies in place, their employees that they need. That's why that initial period is for them to get $1 million in the bank, for them to be able to run their operations. And so I don't think we've yet seen it come to fruition where they're actually able to to come and do audits and spot inspections and things like that. But without question, what was problematic for us a year ago was my need to be able to prove conclusively at trial that this is a game that has aspects of random number generators or gambling rather than skills. And so that was the thing that was inhibiting us. Now the Gaming Commission is the one that certifies these machines. We accept this machine. They put a sticker on it and makes it legal in the state of Wyoming. As was correctly put out, you know, they realized that this was a lot of work to bite off in one big mouthful, and so they have given them time to kind of get their feet underneath them, understand the lay of the land, and be able to proceed further with future clarifications if needed in the law.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
Vice Mayor, and members of the council, just to provide a little bit of background to compliance, because it's an important part that we have in follow-up to the statute implementation, that we have enforcement now for these games. Mr. Mayor, my name's Guy Cameron, and I am the compliance director for Cowboy Skill Games of Wyoming. A little bit, just a quick background. I'm a Wyoming native. I was born here in Casper. My history was in emergency management in the fire service in Cheyenne. And then my recent job was working for Governor Meade in Homeland Security. And so today, my job is to look at compliance for Cowboy Skill Games of Wyoming. And what does that mean? That means, most importantly, that we follow the laws of the state and at the local level. That is very important. Leslie described what the criteria is passed by the Wyoming legislature. And as components to that, as you go into a location, these games have to be in a age-restricted area and signage that indicates that. And that is monitored by the local establishment that has the games. My job is a contract that clearly defines the business practices for Cowboy Skill Game with those location owners and also with the operators that are across the state for Cowboy Skill Games. So it's important that we make sure that we follow the laws locally and at the state level. And as it relates to some of those enforcement questions, which is very important to local law enforcement, as I work with the operators across the state, as the commission works with the enforcement process, they receive complaints. I'll receive them now and again regarding a complaint or a question of legality. And if there is that question that comes to me, then my job is to let the state know, the Wyoming Gaming Commission, responsible for the regulation of these skill games, of a particular questionable practice. Currently, the Wyoming Gaming Commission has one enforcement officer, and they will have a second enforcement officer that will come on here in just a matter of a couple of weeks, if not days, for a position that will come be filled. Now, in addition to the Gaming Commission as responsibility for skill games, they have a broad brush of enforcement for regulation over bingo and pull tabs that is forthcoming. They have regulation responsibilities for historic horse racing and the horse racing industry across the state. So they have a tremendous amount of responsibility with right now short staffing. And as Chief McFeeters has indicated, they're in their infancy and they're working to to build up their cadre for enforcement. So again, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and the council, my job is to make sure the Cowboy Skill game is legal in Natrona County, and that we provide a amusement, entertainment value to the customers here that want to play this game and have some skill set and are challenged by these games. And I want to make sure that they have a good experience and that our location owners and operators are following the laws. And by the code of conduct, if they are not in compliance, then there are penalties to that location owner and or operator for falling out of compliance by our contracts. So if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer for you.
I think we're good.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. Appreciate it. Mr. Manager, do we have anybody else on this topic? I don't believe so. Okay. We'll move on to utility business plans. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We have the opportunity tonight to receive information with regard to two projects that have been underway for quite some time. The enterprises have been engaging in the development of business plans that, in my estimation, is a nice step in the right direction with regard to helping to manage the initiatives and the strategies that these utilities can adopt and move forward with. There's two differences. Well, there's a major difference with regard to what you're going to see coming through the utilities portion in comparison to sanitation. Sanitation has been putting together integrated solid waste plans for quite some time now. And with regard to this particular effort, sanitation has taken more of a business plan approach as a means of updating their solid waste plan. And so in my estimation, I hope you'll see, like I do, that this is a good adjustment and makes sense, and I think it bodes well for a roadmap, as it were, pertaining to programs and efforts and initiatives that the solid waste endeavor will take from now on. As far as utilities go, this is really our first time that we've taken a business plan approach with respect to water in particular, and the efforts at trying to map our future and improve certain areas that we have not been as effective in the past. And so you'll see some of those particular areas and concepts highlighted in tonight's presentation. We do have our respective consultants with us here this evening, and they will help us walk through the major tenets of our respective plans here. And if we could, and it pleases the council, I'd like to start with the utilities division and then go, if we could, into sanitation. Council should be aware that the purpose of tonight's discussion is to not only take your questions, but whatever feedback you might have, particularly as it relates to the emphasis that you think should be placed or not placed with regard to various areas in each of the divisions and enterprises, or with regard to the timing of our forecast, if you will, for some of the initiatives that you'll be discussing this evening. So feel free to participate at any point throughout these conversations. I'm sure our consultants would welcome that.
Do you want to pass this over to me?
Please, yes.
Great, thank you. I'm sitting here floating from my office in Denver. I can't see you, but I trust that you're all out there somewhere. And thank you for letting us do this remotely today. We wish we could be there with you. Mayor, council members, thank you for taking time. I'm going to go over at a very high level the strategic plan that we helped develop with Casper's Public Utilities Division, but I encourage you to jump in whenever you have a question and whatever you want some more detail, and we'd be happy to provide that. My colleague also will be here. Both Kyle, Stephen, and Dennis are with me, and I offer them to chime in as well as they need to. So I'm a little bit, there we go. I'm a little bit clunky with this go-to meeting. I'm used to other tools, so sorry if it takes me a minute to get used to it. What we're going to talk about today is, first of all, the reason that we did the strategic plan. What was the impetus for developing it? As Carter had indicated, it's the very first time that the Public Utilities Division has attempted to do this, and we'd like to talk a little bit about why we did that, our objectives in developing that, the method we used to make sure that we were developing a plan that makes sense both to local circumstances and also to the industry. We will talk a little bit about our findings from the self-assessment that we used, and then, of course, the finished product from all this work, which is a vision, value statement, and several initiatives that we think will bring the Utilities Division closer to their goals. So the reason that we took this on and the drivers for it were first the Generation Casper Comprehensive Plan. This opened up a lot of opportunities for how the Utilities Division can support what else is being done by the city to support the economy and other aspects of Casper. We also had the city manager's vision that Carter shared with us during one of our workshops. And then also just the fact that industry advances, and we want to make sure that we are taking advantage of the trends and the best practices that are out there so that Utilities Division can be as good operationally as possible. That led to the development of opportunities, needs, and challenges that we looked at in order to come up with a strategic plan that we think addresses opportunities, addresses needs, and also the challenges that we saw from for our investigation. So why did we do the business plan? What was our objectives? Well, there's a lot of reasons to do a strategic plan, that is for sure. And what we heard from the division leadership was that they wanted to communicate who they are. They want people to start understanding what it is that they are put on this earth to do. And also to start the conversation with their stakeholders, including you, the city council, but also the public and their own employees, so that we can talk about what we're doing today, but also what we're going to do in the future to make sure that we stay as operationally efficient and as focused on our stakeholders as possible. So it's really about opening a conversation. So how did we go about doing this? Well, we took several methods. We used a survey of all the employees of the division in order to get their insights into what they think the vision and the values of the organization, so it would resonate with them. We also took on the effective utility management assessment, which is something that was kind of devised in 2008 by the EPA and a lot of different entities within the water sector, and has been used ever since then as a way to get a handle on what you're doing well within utility and what you can do a little bit better. We also had 3 intensive workshops with the division management and got their insights into these different areas. And then, of course, we had our insights that we offered from other work that we've done with other utilities. So we took all this together, and what did we come up with? We found that in a lot of areas, the division is performing really very well. You should be very impressed with the level of performance of your utilities. And this was from, of course, internal stakeholders, but external stakeholders that we surveyed as well. We found that product quality is #1, and really, isn't that what that should be, both in performance and in importance. The 3 areas that they did decide that they wanted to focus a little bit on were in financial viability, employee leadership and development, and also in customer satisfaction. Does not mean that they're doing badly in any of these areas, but these are areas where they saw the most need and the most importance and the most opportunity that they could take advantage of. So based on that, let's look at what we came up with as far as the strategic plan that would address these 3 areas of opportunity. First of all, we have the vision, and because my screen is being shared with you, I can't read it from my screen, so let's see if I can pull it up here. Okay, so here's the vision that we came up with. We are recognized as providers of life-sustaining water and wastewater services and as stewards of our community's resources, working to meet the needs of current and future generations. Now, I got to tell you, I have developed a lot of vision statements over my career, and I really like this one for several reasons. First of all, that they recognize that they really provide a service unlike any other. It is life-sustaining. We cannot have a community without it. And I like how they talked about being a steward for the resources, not only of water, but also the people's finances. They want to make good decisions today that also will make sense in the future, thereby sustaining the benefits they get through their operations. So I think it is a solid, clear, and memorable vision that will serve to direct them into the future. As far as the values, you'll find that they're very consistent with the vision as well. Again, this idea of stewardship, the idea of professionalism, accountability, communication, quality, as we heard before, that is of primary importance to them, efficiency, integrity, and of course, safety. All these things resonate not only internally, but I think they also resonate with the stakeholders that the division serves. Is there any questions about the vision or the value statement?
I think we're good.
Let's go on to the business initiatives. Good. Thank you. Sorry, didn't give you enough of a pause there. As far as customer service, that was one of the areas that they wanted to focus upon, as you recall. And so, once again, I'm going to get my crib sheet here. How they decided to focus in on this, and again, I need to say, they don't have any problems in this area. They have really very good customer service. They have a non-conflictive relationship with customers, and as well as their outreach and their customer satisfaction. They just thought that there was an opportunity to strengthen some of their lines of communication with customers and to strengthen the relationship that they have with their customers and other stakeholders. So if we do have to make changes in the future, if we do have to change rates, if we do have to change levels of service, we will have the means to reach out to the customers, to engage them in the changes that they have to do, and to have good communications and a good relationship that they can depend upon in order to make those changes. So in these areas, what they want to do is, of course, look first to internally for their stakeholders. What is it that what should be their stakeholder goals? What kinds of things do they need to tell the stakeholders about? What kind of educational programs do we need? What do we need stakeholders to believe or know about us? And once we figure that out internally, then it's to go outside and to figure out, okay, who are our stakeholders? What do they care about? How can we approach them? How do they want to be communicated with us? And then from that to develop a stakeholder outreach program. Hopefully also by providing a new position or a new place within the organization that focuses on exactly that. That position or that office would also be responsible for the second initiative, which is a customer satisfaction strategy. Similar to the outreach strategy, it's about figuring out what drives customer satisfaction. Have them tell us, what level of service would they like to have? What matters to them? What kind of communications do they want to have from us? And once we figure that out, to develop a series of performance measures that we can use to figure out how we're doing. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And to take that voice of the customer internal to the operations and figure out how to make our operations in line with what customers tell us that they wish. On this next initiative, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Dennis Jackson, who was integral in helping them develop these initiatives. Can you jump in, Dennis?
Sure thing. Hi, Joy, and to Mr. Mayor and members of the council, thank you for allowing us to present this today. We together prepared this plan, and one of my focus areas was on the financial and business aspects of the utility. and the financial viability initiatives that emerged from the utility improvement process and evaluation. It's important to keep in mind that when we talk about gaps, these are already, functions and things that the utility is already doing. But what they agreed upon and what we saw was that a more formal process and an expanded evaluation of many of these financial viability questions was needed. So the first it's listed here, number 3, to create a business performance model. Really, in terms of implementation, that's second. The next one is identify revenue and savings opportunities. That really comes first. And identifying additional revenue and cost savings opportunities that will meet the eventual criteria in the business performance model is the objective. And so you can imagine, utilities are thinking about these things every day, and we assist utilities doing this same thing across the country, really. Savings are things like, regulatory compliance relief, or energy efficiency improvements, or automation and remote technologies that could be used to reduce costs. Those are all on the forefront of of the utility manager's mind. And then in terms of revenue, improving the revenue profile of the utility and doing things that are in addition to just your monthly bill, things that are where this utility would like to consider additional services or additional sales to generate revenue, things like partnering with telecom services or expanding its service, or even things like insurance of water lines, and have come into conversations. So you can imagine all of these ideas are swimming around out there, and those will, as part of the next initiative, would be essentially evaluated through a business performance process, where the utility is committed to, in this initiative, develop a model for vetting and prioritizing these opportunities, and on the basis of criteria that will be developed. Really, the idea of this business performance evaluation is, where does management need to focus their time? I think that is a question they've struggled with, and they're going to be implementing as part of this initiative. So that's Joy, that's a summary of the financial viability.
Great. Thanks, Janice. Are there any questions on the first 2 areas that we covered? We just have one more area, and that is where would this go? There we go. Employee leadership and development. Now, it's true that the city of Casper is a great place to live. However, it's distant from other major cities and, doesn't really have a huge labor pool for that reason. So we want to make sure that all the employees that we do have working for the utilities, we retain them. After we invest all that, training and development monies in, making our employees as skilled as they need to be, we need to keep them happy and keep them within the organization and develop them into the positions that others are going to be vacating as they retire. And so that is why we have these 2 initiatives, which is to create an employee development and retention program and to design an employee succession plan. These 2 things, of course, are related. It requires first looking at the organization and really getting a good understanding of where the current gaps are in skills, or which of the positions that are really difficult to fill, or which are the areas where, especially leadership positions, where people are being tenured out and retiring, and to help make it sure that the organization is as flexible and full of people who can develop into these gaps as possible. And so again, we recommend working with the city HR department in order to determine what those gaps are, where are we at risk, and to develop the proper recruitment plans, the proper development plans, and looking out for those future leaders so that we can make sure that they stay with the organization long enough to lead us into the next future. So why did we pick these initiatives? Well, to be cut to the chase, because we believe it aligns to what it is the master plan says that Casper needs. It also supports the city management vision. It leverages industry advancement and trends as seen through the effective utility management work that we did. And it also addresses the issues that people within the organization said that we need to address, including financial viability, employee leadership and development, and customer satisfaction. So we think that these initiatives really focus the organizations on the areas where the most opportunity exists and will help the Public Utilities Division to remain in tune with what's going on locally as well as what's going on in the industry. So that is what we have as far as our high-level review. Are there any questions that I can help to answer?
Does not look like Councilman Bates.
On that last slide with initiatives, you have the needs for the generation of Casper on down, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is that years? Is that priority number one?
The number of the initiatives.
The number of initiatives, okay.
Right. Yeah, we had just a numbered them for ease, 3, 4, 5, yeah.
Did you have anything of what was top priority out of all those?
We did not prioritize them. We think that they're all equally very important, although there's some that are what we'd say more urgent. That is that you'd have to do them first before, doing others. As Dennis talked about, coming up with the model to evaluate new ideas before you ask people to start coming up with ideas. That kind of prioritization there might be. But I don't believe we showed any priorities between the initiatives that we just discussed.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no other questions.
Thank you so much for your time. I much appreciate it. And it was great working with the Public Utilities Division. What a great group of people you have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if it's okay, we can now switch to the solid waste portion of our presentation this evening and go with any questions or directives you might have from there.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if individuals can hear me.
We can hear you here.
All right, hey, thank you. I'll be calling up a presentation here. Much like the previous presenter, I apologize for technical difficulties we may have. Can members of the audience and City Council see the presentation?
We can.
All right, thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you on behalf of the city, the staff that Cindy gets to work with, Cindy in particular, for the opportunity to work with the Solid Waste Department and the opportunity to present, you could say, kind of the draft results of this business plan. There's a couple items I'd like to touch on here, with the understanding that in presenting here, this is a pretty high level. You could say a broad overview, with the hopes that members of the audience and city council has the ability to have follow-up questions at the end of this. So to get started, we'll touch a little bit on the purpose of the solid waste management plan, its importance as a budgeting tool for capital planning. We'll also spend a little bit of time kind of exploring or presenting on the items that we've discussed with staff and identified within our plan that should be given consideration during years 1 through 5 and years 6 through 10. One thing I will share with council is that the plan does look beyond the 10-year period, actually from the period of between 11 and 20 years, with the understanding that some of the items related to the management of solid waste do require a longer period towards implementing and planning appropriately for them. What is the purpose of this plan? And I apologize, I didn't catch the individual's name that introduced the previous speaker and myself, but I have to applaud comments that were made towards, you could say, developing a plan that includes, you could say, budgetary considerations. The general goal of this plan is to, provide comprehensive, safe, cost-effective, environmentally sound solid waste management services. You could say the two-headed goal of this is to meet the state requirements so that the city can remain eligible for landfill remediation funding, and to provide a blueprint for planned capital improvements now and going into the future. I want to touch a little bit on the landfill remediation program. As most of the city council may know, the city of Casper has what's ranked by the state of Wyoming as a high priority site. I compliment the city and staff that they've moved a long ways already in relation to that remediation process, but that we want to be able to submit this plan so that they continue to be eligible for state funds for ongoing efforts that are needed in relationship to that remediation. I think most members of council are kind of familiar with, you could say, the graph in front of us. The graph in front of us is for the bail fill fund. But I want to touch a little bit on the benefit of this plan as a budgeting tool, more of a planning budgeting tool than just the financial implications around it. So the financial implications are very important. When we looked at this, we wanted to use consistent assumptions. We wanted to acknowledge capital, operations, and reserve funding. For the bail fill graph that's in front of you, in particular the blue line, you'll see how the city kind of builds up their reserve fund only to see it go down, and then build it up again only to see it go down. That's a direct reflection of basically, you could say, opening and closing cells in the landfill. Those are periodically scheduled events that are big capital expenditures, but are critical towards not only meeting regulatory requirements, but continuing to provide, well, you could say, landfill capacity for the services that the city provides its residents. In addition, on the collection side, though not directly reflected in this graph, those are important capital expenditures as well, whether it's new collection trucks, replacements for existing containers, or general maintenance as a whole. I apologize for the heading on this. Please disregard projects to consider. This is really just touching on the items that we looked at in relation to the existing solid waste system that the city of Casper implements. And that's anywhere from collection, disposal, recycling, street sweeping, composting, yard waste, yard debris, household hazardous waste, and electronics. It also has a very strong component related to what we call promotion and education. The picture on here is a picture of the newly constructed material recovery facility. And I really want to emphasize that this is a great opportunity for the city to further, you could say, educate on a one-to-one basis. And I'll explain that a little bit more. But it's also my understanding that the community has, that Cindy and her group has done a fair amount of effort, legwork, you could say, towards already developing that community outreach, that information stream in relation to the material recovery facility. It's been my experience for communities that open a material recovery facility that the interaction between the resident dropping off the material and the interaction of the staff there is a huge benefit to the community in educating individuals on what's the right thing to recycle, what isn't the right thing to recycle, and resulting in a much, you could say a much cleaner waste, recycled waste stream that then has a greater market value. Projects that we considered within that 1 to 5 year window of time, and there's a couple of slides here. These are just some of the ones that we highlighted. I would direct council, it's my understanding that you received a draft of this business plan. Given consideration to the time constraints, time constraints we all have, if there's one section I could direct you to for review, would be section 6 of that business plan, where we expand upon these items. There's a summary table in there where we expand upon these items. But I want to highlight a few of them in relation to Cindy and her staff. We looked at waste disposal improvements, including improvements to the bagging system. You could say the mixing of waste prior to baling, and then ultimately the segregation or removal of items that aren't accessible to baling, i.e. mattresses. In addition, one other item that I didn't put on this slide but want to mention is the discussion we had around expanding basically the storage building to better accommodate what I would consider general maintenance items on the equipment that the solid waste department operates. I think that would be a great benefit to operating efficiency. We also looked at the residential recycling, including conversations around curbside yard waste collection, curbside collection through public-private partnerships, and yes, with the opening of the material recovery facility, the elimination of the recycling depots. And I realize that on that item in particular, that the council and staff will be having further conversations. Furthermore, years 1 through 5, and you could probably look at litter prevention and say, my goodness, aren't we doing a lot of that already? And the answer is yes. But litter management as it relates to, you could say land disposal is an ongoing beast that every system tries to improve upon. And what we've listed here, the implementation of mixed load fee and evaluating a banning plastic bag, is towards improving that litter prevention. We also know that the city is working towards kind of minimizing risk. One example here is the thermal technology that they're looking at implementing towards, you could say, reducing response times related to composting fires. And last, in that 1 to 5 year range, though not least important, in fact, I would say probably most important, is and how do we serve the community, the customer better? And some of the things we've talked about there is a dawn to dusk, commercial drop-off area. Separately staffing the compost sale yard, which sees a lot of activity. And I have to applaud the city and staff on making that such a successful program. Looking at a potential reduced rate for clean wood waste drop-off. And you could say initiating a reuse thrift store. Basically for the purposes of reusing items that others may find beneficial, others are in the process of discarding, and instead of just having it end up in the landfill, there might be some reuse opportunities on certain things. A broader range, kind of looking at years 6 through 10, and some of this requires definitely additional thought. One could say the development of a marketing plan or a strategy, but whether that's compost, out-of-county waste agreements, commercial collection are just a few that we listed here. And then gas development. And we had a pretty good conversation and completed an evaluation for the city about whether this item should fall in the 1 to 5 year category. There's a memo that's provided kind of as an evaluation there. And then it goes without saying that the city is required to update this plan once every 10 years or on a 10-year cycle. I apologize for, one could say, just hitting on some of the highlights here. I would encourage city council members to review that draft business plan. There's a lot more information in there. In trying to be cognizant of the time we have here, I've tried to hit on some of the highlights. I'd like to open it up for questions, but first I'd ask Cindy if there's items I missed, things I've misstated, and/or items that you could say, emphasize further before we open it up for questions. Cindy?
I don't think so. You did a good job of a very high-level review. But he's right, that table 6 has the detail.
Okay, do we have any questions from council? Councilman Powell.
I'm not sure how to phrase this, sir, but is there one single thing that we could do, in your estimation, that it would extend the life of our cells?
Yes, and I apologize, I didn't catch your name, Councilman. It's called diversion. And I think some of the things that we've touched on, not only in this presentation, but within the broader business plan, is geared directly towards that. Whether it's increased recycling, whether it's the reuse of C&D, whether it's the reuse of items that may still have some value, the best, most effective way for you to, you could say, increase the life of your landfill is to divert as much waste as you can, within reason.
Second question.
Thank you for that question.
And here's my off-the-wall question. I appreciate the long-term view, and I think that's appropriate that we have a plan going as far out as 20 years, but obviously this is a rapidly evolving area as far as what we do with waste. Many years ago, there was discussion of incinerating our waste and trying to use it to generate electricity, and I think that was dismissed because of all of the pollution problems that would cause with trying to deal with what would happen if you burned everything that was in the landfill. But I'm sure you look at long-range trends as far as technologies that are under development, and I'm just curious, is it possible that somewhere down the road, a landfill will stop being viewed as a liability and will transition into an asset?
Again, thank you for that question. I'll share with you from my experience. I've had the opportunity to work in the waste business for almost 30 years. If some there may not look at that as an opportunity, I've seen it as an opportunity. I've had the benefit of working for, you could say the public sector that works on waste to energy facilities, i.e. the incineration of waste. That's a good thing. One could say that's a step up in what we call the waste hierarchy versus landfilling. In the same sense, that comes with a huge capital cost and a long-term commitment that has to go into it. I'm not a strong proponent of waste to energy versus my previous statement on waste diversion. This may be a little philosophical and beyond the city's control, and one could say our control as general consumers, but I really believe the heart of reducing our waste stream lies on the manufacturing side of things. There's a lot of other things that drive that market, like health and safety components, durability, marketing. Unfortunately, the waste end of that product is not looked at, from my perspective, as a high enough priority.
Any other questions from council? Okay, Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I just wanted to add that I really appreciate the work that's gone into this with Andrew and his team, and in my estimation, these two products really adjust the dial, as it were, with regard to how we can look at our enterprises and hopefully manage them from now on with these initiatives and goals in mind. So, Mr. Mayor, unless council has other direction or changes you'd like to see, we would go ahead and start the implementation process of these respective plans, if that pleases the council.
Give a thumbs up. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we good with him?
Thank you, everybody on the call.
Okay, thank you as well.
Okay, we'll move on. We're going to skip down to number 5 and go with the animal ordinance follow-up. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Council has entertained some conversation and dialogue with regard to many of the concepts contained in the revisions that we're proposing for the animal control and care ordinances. One of the things that staff did pursuant to our conversation with all of you the previous meeting was visit with some local advocates as it relates to ideas and concerns that they have with respect to this ordinance and some of the ideas being proposed. There were a number of ideas and things that we missed that they helped point out. There's a couple things that we may not have totally seen eye to eye with, and there's also a couple things that we kind of came to a middle ground on, if you will, with respect to some of these ideas. And so what we thought we would do, if it's okay with all of you, is present some of those adjustments and see if you were okay with them, and if so, we'd like to take the steps to prepare these for formal amendments, if you will, if that's the appropriate mechanism to prepare for the next reading of this proposal. And so if I could turn some time over to Mr. Henley to walk us through some of that language nuance. Please ask questions as well, because we want to be sure that you are with what it is that we're proposing and have a full understanding. So With that, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to defer to Mr. Henley if I could.
Mr. Henley?
Great, thank you, Mayor and Council. We are fortunate to have with us today, at least we had a couple of members of the Game and Fish. And I know one of the provisions we had talked about in the past was the feeding of non-domesticated animals. And so they wanted to come and visit with you about that, and with your permission, maybe just to get them up here and have them express themselves, I would ask Brian Olson and Justin Benfit to come forward and maybe discuss with the council their thoughts, their the benefits of having this type of an ordinance, any contraindications in having this type of ordinance that they're aware of.
Hey, good evening. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is Justin Benfit. I'm the Wildlife Management Coordinator with the Game and Fish here in Casper. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of the council, for having us. I guess and I should say, for the record, Brian Olson had to step away. He had an emergency at the office with a utility issue we're dealing with. So anyway, I guess I'm not entirely clear as to what the council has considered to date. I know that Chief McFeeters asked us to come down and provide some testimony as to our support with a resolution regarding wildlife feeding. And so I'm happy to do that, just so you guys know. And if it pleases the council, I'm certainly happy to provide this after the fact, but we do have copies of other city ordinances that have passed regarding wildlife feeding bans that have occurred from Lander to Cody, Rollins, Sundance, Newcastle. There's a host of communities in Wyoming that have implemented these ordinances. I should start off by saying that the Wyoming Game and Fish Department strongly supports wildlife feeding bans. Wildlife feeding can lead to a whole suite of problems that can range from human safety issues all the way to additional workloads for our folks. So I guess it's my understanding in visiting with Chief McFeeters is that, and the folks at Metro, that there's significant concern with some workload issues and some safety and health issues and frankly just nuisance issues with respect to feeding of stray cats and pigeons and some other non-game not even wildlife/feral species of animals. That certainly is not within the purview of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, but we certainly support Metro in that endeavor and the PD. One of the problems that we would like to discuss with the council, I guess, that we repeatedly deal with is the feeding of wildlife or game animals. So the most common species that we deal with in the Casper area would be deer, especially mule deer, but to a lesser extent white-tailed deer, and then wild turkeys. When we have folks that are feeding these species, it can invoke a series of problems. I will actually be testifying in front of the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission 2 days from now regarding our proposed chronic wasting disease management plan. Within that plan, one of the things that we've directed our department to do is to engage city councils and county commissions to propose these types of ordinances. When you feed mule deer, you can artificially concentrate mule deer in fairly high densities, and you can really exacerbate the transmission of chronic wasting disease, which is a 100% fatal disease to deer. It's something that we see a very high prevalence of here in the city of Casper. We don't have really good data. We actually kind of quit collecting data on it because we see so much of it. So there's significant levels of disease spread that can be associated with just unnaturally high concentrations of deer, and that can occur in a golf course or a park. I'm not saying it's solely attributed to wildlife feeding, but that can certainly exacerbate it. One of the other issues that we deal with when we have folks that do feed deer, and it's not always within the Casper city limits, but it's also within the county, is the repeated attraction of predators. Just last week, I dealt with a mountain lion on the east end of town. You guys probably saw the news. I jumped it from me to the mayor out of someone's front yard. We had another lion on the country club golf course back in March, and these issues are not always, we can't always directly say that they're attributed to individuals feeding deer, but that certainly can be a component of it. In fact, years ago I had to euthanize a mountain lion on the Garden Creek Loop that was directly attributed to an individual feeding deer and turkeys both. And that obviously invokes some human health concern or human safety concerns if we have large carnivores like that repeatedly frequenting a neighborhood. So turkeys are or can be especially, I guess, problematic in town. Turkeys have a real knack of going to the residents where they get fed, congregating in really high densities, especially during the winter months, and then they never seem to roost on the property of the individuals that feed them. So it often becomes a neighbor's liability and really nuisance problem to deal with. When you get large concentrations of turkeys, they can they always roost in trees. They can defecate over residences, things like that. They're very loud in the morning. It's hard to sleep when you have a gobbling or yelping turkey at 5 a.m. flying off the roost tree. So we deal with lots of complaints over that. And I guess, one of the last issues that I'd like to bring up with respect to wildlife feeding is just the sheer volume of wildlife vehicle collisions that we deal with. Certainly Metro helps us out. Metro could testify as to how many carcasses they end up picking up that are not even ones that Game and Fish Department personnel dispatch. But between us and PD officers and Metro folks, we deal with hundreds and hundreds of hit deer and antelope around the city of Casper every year. And wildlife feeding is just kind of one more thing that can exacerbate that. We typically when we promote wildlife feeding bans, we like to exclude traditional ag practices. We're not out there looking to cite an ag producer that just has a few deer show up on a feed line or something like that. And we certainly exclude things like bird feeders that are much more innocuous. So with that, that's really kind of it in a nutshell. I could tell you guys some other stories, I guess, but and we've even had issues where folks were feeding chuckers in East Casper and they were getting up on people's roofs and picking off the grit off their shingles and things like that. So it can kind of run the gamut of issues. Again, I'm not sure where you guys are at with respect to developing Casper specific ordinance, but in some of the research that we've done with some of the ordinances around the state, many of the ordinances specifically list, they list specific species that are banned from being intentionally fed. I'm not sure if that's where Casper is going with that. If that's the case, we'd be happy to help provide our information on which species we would like to see prohibited from being fed. And then, I guess one of the things I've noticed in some of these ordinances, as far as the enforcement mechanism behind that, we see some municipalities having fines that range from $25 to $50. Others, like Cody, I think Lander fines can range up to $200, and then even Cody fines can slide all the way up to $750. And in some cases like that, they actually have concerns with things like grizzly bears, which can be a real human safety issue. So yeah, we have a host of those that we'd be happy to provide. And other than that, I guess I'd just like to say, we work really well with Metro and the PD, and we would strongly endorse a wildlife feeding ban. We would just like to see it extended to even, things beyond raccoons and feral cats and include even some of the game species.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
And I know when we had originally talked to it, we were worried about some wording as far as like just generally saying like fowl, because obviously, people have bird feeders and that's not really what we're getting at. And so I like your suggestion of maybe having like a specific list of species that, Game and Fish has recognized are a problem in this area.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With reference to the feral cat problems, are you aware of any impacts that that feral cats have on any wildlife species? Obviously, they're not going out and killing deer or things like that, I hope. But any other wildlife species?
Well, Councilman Huber, I guess I would say that we don't collect any data, so we certainly don't have any concrete information on that. It's generally assumed, and it's an accurate assumption that that feral cats kill an extraordinary amount of birds and small mammals every year. I believe the Audubon Society estimates it's somewhere upwards of of 1.5 billion birds per year killed by house cats, whether or not those are all feral cats or just folks' house cats that they let out at night. So yeah, they do cause, I mean, they definitely kill significant numbers of small mammals and birds every year. But it's not a problem that the Wyoming Game and Fish typically deals with.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Henley?
Thank you. Maybe continuing with that same vein and talking about the feral cats and feeding them. We did meet with that advocate group, and the advocate group was advocating for some type of basically a trap, neuter, and release program as well, and they want to investigate that and possibly find some type of beneficiary or nonprofit group that would fund that. And certainly, if they want to come to us with some type of a program like that, we would forward it on to you for your consideration and thoughts too. So that may be coming down the road. But those are basically the non-domesticated animals feeding, which would include feral cats. We do have an exclusion in there for birds or squirrels so that those would not be any fines or adverse consequences if you feed birds or squirrels. Continuing then also, we have 2 members, maybe even 3 members here of the Metro Animal Control and Protection Group. Scott Shell is here, as is Tiffany Hyde. And if they want to come forward, we can also discuss with them some of the reasons they wanted to have these amendments, if that suits the council. You know, one of the questions that came up when we were talking with the advocacy group, Scott and Tiffany, was in looking at the cruelty to animal provision. Basically, one of the suggestions was that we remove from that the requirement that would be expressly stated for sufficient good and wholesome food. And we're just wanting to know perhaps if you could explain kind of your rationale on the enforcement and why that should be removed from the cruelty to animal provision.
Thanks, Mayor. Scott Shell, Animal Protection Supervisor. And I don't think that's verbiage we wanted to remove from the cruelty to animals. So that might just have been a misprint, but I don't think that's something that we want.
It wasn't a remove, it was a replace it and move it under a neglect instead of cruelty.
Okay.
I've visited with my fellow officers and people I know in the community as well, and we all truly and wholly believe there's a difference between neglect and cruelty. Cruelty comes with an intent to cause harm. Neglect is a failure to provide, protect. And that's where I was moving the failure to provide wholesome food is to under neglect, because there's several different levels. You can intentionally not feed your dog, which would then obviously be cruelty, but you can also not provide it the proper nutrition that it needs to thrive.
So with, I would think then with council's permission, if that would be your direction, we could amend the statute before your reading next week and just include that, taking the cruelty to animal provision with respect to the feeding of animals and good and wholesome food and clean water, and move that down to neglect then, with your permission, for your consideration.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
We're good in doing that.
Good deal. One of the other matters that had come up and which is referenced in the memo is deals with tethering. And we were pretty restrictive on tethering when we came out of the last amendment to the animal ordinance. And in discussing that with the advocacy group, they felt that 10 hours in any 24-hour period would be excessive. And so based upon their concerns, we actually modified that for your consideration, and also to talk with the animal protection officers here, and brought that down to 5 hours in any 24-hour period as opposed to the 10, which I understand that Metro was thinking may be a little bit better fit than just the 2 hours, because I think of the work constraints that people have with animals and the difficulty they have in some of their properties. So if maybe we could have either Scott or Tiffany talk about whether they think this 5 hours in any 24-hour period would be an appropriate direction to go.
Mr. Henley, I respectfully disagree with that. The reason being is, just take me for example. I work a 10-hour shift. I don't get a lunch hour. There's days I don't stop for 10 hours. If my living arrangements at that time left me no choice but to tether my dog to work, what am I to do? Rather than, or, you know, is it fair to my dog then to be left inside in a little 4x4 or 2x4 cage for 10 hours compared to being able to be outside on a tether? Or even then, you know, you compare if I put my dog on a 15-foot tether, which in construct gives it a roughly 15 by 15 area or more to wander, compared to putting it in a 6x10 kennel for that 10 hours. It's given the same provisions of an adequate shelter, the same provisions of water at all times, the shelters to be placed just as it would in a kennel, to where it protects it from the typically winds coming out of the southwest, that type of scenario. I've been with Metro for 16 and a half years. I've been an officer on the street for 6 of those years. I personally, and I know I think I visited with the 2 gals in particular that are in this advocacy group, and part of their issue is they consider tethering to create an aggression issue. I personally have not seen that in the 16 and a half years of my job to where that's been an issue. I have come across the people that, yeah, they have tethered their dogs 24/7 to some extent. And even at those times, those dogs have not been aggressive. I do not note any more aggression from a tethered dog to a continually kenneled dog. And that is, you know, the time frame I had proposed, that 10 to 12 hours, was to accommodate the folks that have to work, need to go get groceries, but yet then their animal can still go out in the evening and go. There are parks within, trailer parks within the city of Casper that don't allow them to build anything more than a 3-foot fence, or no fence at all. Won't allow them to construct a kennel. It's not fair to the dog, let alone the owner.
And I did some research, and I came up from that meeting on the tethering, on just different tethering requirements. And I found something that came from California ordinance, and it talks about there's no time restraint, but it just says it's unlawful, you know, to tether your animal with a fastened chain, tie, restrain, or cause the dog to be fastened, you know, to house, trees, fences, other stationary or highly immobile objects by means of rope, chain, strap, except in circumstances where the following requirements are met. And one of the reasons why we wanted to extend it from 2 hours is just because we have returned dogs to the house where the owner says, oh, I've got to fix my fence, but I've got to go to work. I can't fix it till tomorrow. And that's what we were trying to get that exception for. And it says the tethering, you can require them to be tethered if the tethering shall not be for more time than is necessary due to owner or custodian to complete a temporary task. And so that's kind of what we were looking at is just being able to allow somebody to tether just for that temporary task of repairing their fence where the animals are getting out. Because a lot of people can't keep them in the house, can't keep them in their kennels because they do get that separation anxiety. They tear up their house. So we're looking at more just a temporary solution until they can come up with a permanent solution to their problem. I mean, it does say it has requirements on the type of tethering, body harness or a non-choke collar. Dog must have access to fresh water and shelter at all times. And it has to be monitored periodically so he doesn't get tangled up and, you know, cause injury to himself. So that was one of the tethering laws that I could find. And I believe, like I said, that came from California, and I took a few pieces from other states as well that I liked. But that was something I thought was kind of what we were aiming for as far as allowing somebody to tether a dog temporarily.
That was an added aspect of it as well, yes?
Yeah, just a temporary solution.
And so what I'm hearing is kind of a temporary solution kind of from you, Scott, but Tiffany, it sounds like you think that this is more of a permanent problem. How many occasions do you see a circumstance where the 10 hours is really necessary and there's no other option to take care of the dog in that circumstance?
I will say that since this has been changed from the original tethering ordinance back to the 2 hours, the calls have not increased for a thing. So I honestly don't know how often it's become an issue, because typically our calls that we get called out for are simply a dog in the backyard without shelter and water. I have not had a specific call of an upset citizen because their neighbor's dog is tethered. It's typically, it may be tethered, but it can't get to a doghouse or water. They don't care that the dog's on the tether. They want it to be able to reach its provisions and its shelter. And so in that aspect of it, I have not talked in depth with the dog owner as to how long they leave it tethered per se, I guess, for that aspect of it.
I just note that we've had a few that we've returned back to their owner, the animals back to their owner. And the APOs, animal protection officers, will walk through them to try to get to the root cause of the problem. Why is this animal getting loose?
Absolutely.
And we'll find the area where the dog is escaping, and they'll say, I can't fix it. I'm going to have to tether them. And we do tell them, the tethering does say 2 hours, because we can't tell them to break the law. So, we do tell them they're 2 hours, and then that's when they bring in well, I've got to go to work. My shift doesn't end until 10 o'clock tonight. I'm going to be gone for the next 8 hours. So that's what we run into a few times, and we just can't tell them, yeah, go ahead and break the law, and that's just the issue that we have with that that minimum of 2 hours.
On that aspect of that, Mr. Henley, I see where your confusion is. Sorry. I see where your confusion is on the difference in what we're talking about, because he is focusing on a temporary fix to a problem until they could fix a fence or fix a kennel. I am talking long-term, because like I was saying, there are places in town that they don't allow them to have a fence adequate to hold a dog, and they don't allow them to build a kennel. These owners have no choice in the matter, and it's not fair to the dog to make it stay cooped up. Like I said, it's not fair to a dog to live inside for 10 to 12 hours in a 2x4 kennel because I can't get home, or the owner can't get home. And I honestly don't see the aggression coming from a tethered dog that they are concerned about, and the reason they focused on this tethering ordinance in the first place. When I met with the gals about this, we actually did kind of butt heads on that aspect of it, because they're focusing on tethering a dog causes it to be aggressive. I have not witnessed that. I honestly have not.
Chief, did you have a comment?
Mayor, thank you. I just wanted to offer some clarification. It was a direct result of the meeting that we had with these advocates. As Scott and I left that meeting, we realized that some of the concerns that they had was in the enforceability of set time limits, and the ability for us to verify conclusively the animal's not been taken care of within X amount of hours. And so I directed Scott to do research on, are there other sample ordinances out there that would be reflective of our desire to not punish somebody who is dealing with an emergency. And so what we've advocated, what Scott has presented to you today was a direct result of that meeting. When hearing the concerns of these advocates on the unenforceability of these time limits, that we looked to find language that would present the opportunity for us to recognize through the educated opinion of the responding animal protection officer, circumstances exist that need to be dealt with temporarily. And so so that's the genesis of what Scott has brought forward today, to give us the flexibility to deal with that without approving people to break an ordinance that we knew they would be breaking, but because of the specific circumstances, it would be a manifest injustice.
I think one of the other matters that probably the council will hear about a little bit is the increase of the temperatures in cars. When it gets to be 70 degrees outside, we now have it in the proposed ordinance that would be kind of a prima facie area where the animal control officers can step in. In the past, that's been 60 degrees, so we've raised it by 10 degrees. And again, as a matter of just experiential thoughts on that, either Mr. Hyde or Mr. Scott.
Yeah, was also one of the ordinances that I researched. And a lot of ordinances don't have a definition with temperatures in there. They have, no owner or person shall confine any animal in a motor vehicle which is done in a manner that places the animal in a life-threatening or extreme health-threatening situation by exposing it to a prolonged period of extreme heat or cold without proper ventilation, fresh water, or other protection from such heat and cold. So a lot of ordinances I researched did not actually specify, just talked about the immediate danger of the animals. And so that's what I wrote up, was the proposal without the temperature, and just something that we get a call if that animal's placed in immediate danger, if it's not provided that fresh water, that adequate ventilation, air conditioning, then it could be a violation. And, you know, I also added on there an officer or animal control officer who finds an animal in a vehicle in violation of the section may enter the vehicle by using the amount of force reasonably necessary to remove the animal if exigency response is required. So I did away with the temperature at all, just because that's based off of what my research. And that ordinance came off from Rhode Island. That's one I copied from Rhode Island. And I thought after researching that, that was pretty beneficial, not having a temperature to define it. Because I think the reason why we want to go from 60 to 70 is because when it's 60 degrees outside and the dog is in the vehicle, that's kind of that temperature where it's not really going to be in much distress. So it's hard to enforce anything when it's 60. But when we don't have a temperature at all and it just talks about extreme cold or heat, that gives us more leeway to enforce and take action, necessary action when something is in danger or in immediate danger of health or any life-threatening risk.
I would like to add to that. The reason I put it back up to the 70 is, in my experience, even being out on the street for 6 years, 60 degrees in Wyoming is a beautiful day. You have the windows down a little bit. It's a gorgeous day out there. So that's why I popped it back up to the 70. And I will state that since we went from 70 to 60 roughly a little over a year ago, the call load has not increased or decreased either way. And quite frankly, if we get a call at 50 degrees outside, somebody claims the dog's in distress, we respond. We're gonna go look regardless. So the temperature thing with what he's got, not even having it, is more than adequate. If we get a call, somebody's concerned about a dog in a vehicle, we're gonna go look into it regardless of the temperature.
And we're going to require them to have
and
water and the ventilation. We're going
Right.
to require that regardless of what the temperature gauge says outside.
Because that's what a dog's required to have in its backyard, so why would it be any different? It's sitting in a parking lot in a car, it needs that water, it needs access to that.
Okay, so we can modify that as well when we bring it for you the next time.
Councilman Kathy, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm going to drop back one if you don't mind.
No, that's good.
Talking about the tethering, and I didn't read all of the minutia in here, but you also made a reference to kennel size. Do we have anything in our current ordinance about kennel size?
No, sir, we do not.
Is there anything in here about tether length?
It has to be a minimum of 3 times the dog's body length.
Okay.
Measured from the dog's nose to
Tip of its nose to tip of, yeah. Did you do the hindquarters or tip of the tail?
The reason I was asking that is you had mentioned a 6x10 kennel.
Right.
Which is 60 square feet, okay? If you have a 15-foot tether, that's 172 square feet the dog has to roam.
Right.
If you put it up against a building, it's even half of that, which is still bigger than a 6x10 kennel.
And typically a 6x10 kennel is your common size that you see people purchase. And that's where my argument comes in, that a tethered dog on a 10 to 15-foot lead technically has more free range with the clear area than a dog in its 6x10 kennel.
Yeah. That was the point I was getting at. And, you know, in the old days, you know, okay, boomer, but, you know, when there were solar clothes dryers out that had the poles, you could actually clip a dog on one of those and...
The trolley lines, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Those things are
Do what?
We have one of those dryers.
There you go. I've been clipped to one of them, so.
Vice Mayor Lutz?
You know, and my parents weren't arrested for childhood cruelty, but anyhow, that was what my curiosity was to see where that fell, and I think you have some very valid points about people that work, and, yeah, 2 hours, really? Yeah.
We don't want them to live their life on the chain, that's not what we're
No,
looking for.
no, but by the same token, yeah, sticking them in a doggy kennel in a laundry room for 12 hours is not right either, so, yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Lutz?
Is there a way to almost like hybrid those? Because I worry that when we use like words like temporary, I mean, somebody who works 10 hours a day, having their dog on a tether all day isn't gonna be temporary. They're probably gonna work 10 hours a day their entire working life.
And that's
So.
what I think Mr. Henley was confused about is the way that Scott was wording it, because we do have the temporary situations right now.
Yeah.
Especially where the wind blew down my fence, because, you know, that never
Yeah.
happens in California. Where that needs to be accommodated for, and we do, just officer discretion, we make that accommodation for them. But I do see it as more of a long-term issue that we need to fix, to where those dogs are allowed to be tethered longer. And like I said, I respectfully even disagree at 5 hours due to the workings.
Oh, and I agree. I mean, I can't imagine that many of us have 5-hour working days. I mean, if you do, good for you, but the rest of us don't have that luxury. And so I guess my point is I like both of them. And so I wonder if there's a way to combine those.
That's what I've been trying to do.
Perfect.
Is review some of the ordinance, some of it, a lot of these pieces are from different, oh, I'm sorry. That's what I've been trying to do, is take different pieces. So some, main part is from California, but then I've also looked at like Florida and some of the other states as well that have some tethering ordinances and what you can and cannot do. And then I take the bits and pieces that look good and what I think would fit for our community and put it together.
Councilman Bates?
I agree with the 10 hours. I just want to state that the 2 hours to 5 hours, that's too short. I think the 10 hours is sufficient, in my opinion. But out of curiosity, if you get calls regarding the tethering issue, how many hours of your guys' time does that go into? Because I know that you have to go check the dog, see that it's tethered, then you're not going to sit there for 2 hours or 5 hours waiting and then go, yep, and then side them. But I know that you're going to leave and then have to come back. But how many hours for you guys do you have to put into that with something like that?
My intention with that ordinance is to place that weight back on the person that is the reporting party, similar to our barking ordinance. If they tell me when I show up, I know for a fact that dog has been tethered more than 10 hours in the last 24 hours, I'm willing to sign as a complainant and go to court if necessary, then we can cite that. And they have to testify under oath that they are saying, yes, this is what occurred. Just like our barking ordinance, they keep a barking log and they have to testify to that. Yes, this is when the dogs barked, I heard it. And that's part of the confusion with the first one, was it was labeled as 10 consecutive hours, which nobody can sit there for 10 hours straight, not take a break, not go do something. So we can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the owner didn't go out there, unleash the dog for 5 to 10 minutes, and then put the dog back on a leash, and therefore restarting that 10 consecutive hours, which it was initially written as, that started the change back to that 2 hours. Whereas this is a 10-hour or whatever total. So if you go out, you leash your dog for 2 hours, 5 times a day, you're at your 10 hours.
I might just add that we, in the proposed ordinance that you previewed last time, it was 5 times the body length as opposed to the 3. And again, if you want to move that back to 3, we can, or move it to 3, I guess, we can. And then also, I think Councilman Bates said that he was also a proponent of the 10-hour time. So maybe if we could just get direction on those, then we won't have to have so many amendments on the floor when this comes up.
Okay, so 5 or
5 hours on body length, 10 hours on the tethering.
Can I respectfully interject on the reason I shortened the tether length again is our trailer parks are small yards, North Casper size, sometimes that 5 times the body length, it creates a tangle hazard. That is why I did that, just so you guys are aware.
Councilman Bate.
I got that backwards. I thought you were wanting to go to 5.
And I would agree with that because I got a Newfoundland and he's long. And you go 5 times the length of him. I got to have a pretty big area for a dog, for a tethering of a dog that big. So I agree with it all.
No, like I said, I misunderstood. I thought you were wanting to go to the 5, and no, 3's fine.
So we're at 5 now, we want to go back to 3. So, gonna get a thumbs up on that if everybody's good with moving that back? Okay. And then on the other, 10 hours consecutive, I guess just to clarify, we're talking 10 hours per week, is that correct?
In a 24-hour period.
In a 24-hour period, okay. Everybody good with that?
And not consecutive, is that right? Just 10 hours?
Correct.
Correct.
So it can be broken down into smaller increments if they choose to, but it's 10 hours total in that 24.
Good. I think we can certainly make those changes for council. There was one other proposed that we had drafted talking about attack, and I think it was Councilman Bates, but I think some other council members also had a concern about the definition of attack, and we had the proposed amendment as part of the attachments, and basically just saying that if the animal being accused of the attack was responding to an aggressive or violent action by a person or animal not on the person's property, that circumstance should be considered as a mitigating factor by the court. And I don't know if the council wants to put that in here before it goes to you for the first time, or just amend it on the floor.
You want to put it in now, or thumbs up? Yeah. Yeah, we can put it in now.
Okay, sounds good.
If we're gonna put it in, we may as well do it now.
You know, Mayor, Council, I think that's all of at least the directions we need now. If you have other ideas, you want us to do something before this comes to the floor, we can certainly do that, or if you have some more questions for any of our speakers.
So I have 2 things, and I know that Game and Fish wanted to add something to it. Scott, maybe you can answer a question for me, or Tiffany can too. There was at one point in time, did we not have a spay and neuter program where we actually had a doctor who would come up and, for lack of better terms, an assembly process of just like taking cats through there and just getting them all done within a day?
No, sir, we didn't have anything like that. We had, altitude vet will sometimes get a student vet, and they'll come and do it for free, but they never came up to do it. There's a couple rescue groups that'll put together like low-cost spay and neuter clinics. I think they held one low-cost spay and neuter clinic. I think the vet came up and they had their own facility up at the shelter, but we've never contracted or had anybody come up and do it.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I just remember that at one point in time, we had somebody up there that it just seemed like there was a day or 2 days that we just went through a bunch of animals.
Yeah, there was one incident I can think of where a vet did come up and do it through their trailer at the shelter.
Yeah.
So it was done all through the shelter. We just let them park the trailer up at the shelter so they could have a place to do it. And then they've done it at the fairgrounds too. I think the fairgrounds has loaned them space for their spay neuter clinics. Yeah.
Okay.
And I do have the cost. I did get the cost of some of the spay and neutering costs around the vets around town. If you guys want a copy of this. This also has some of the ordinance that I had researched, so I could hand these out.
Okay.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask, was a couple of them, is number one, by the time a Metro officer would go out and set a trap, pick up the trap, take the cat to be neutered, and then return the cat to whatever area, have you figured out a total cost for officer time, spay and neuter cost, et cetera, on like a per cat basis?
You can have that one, absolutely.
Oh,
Mayor, if you don't mind, I would like to answer this question. One of the primary concerns of the advocate group that we met with was the concern over feeding of feral cats versus the efficacy of a spay and neuter program. We believe that they're both effective tools to help reduce a problem that we may never cure. We certainly acknowledge that a trap, spay and neuter and release program is an effective tool that can be done. Last year in 2019, we seized 941 cats. The vast majority of those were feral cats, and of those we ended up euthanizing. A very large percentage of those ended up ultimately being euthanized. If you just took the euthanized ones alone and did the spay and neutering of those and then the releasing of them back into our community, a very conservative cost to us would have been greater than $50,000 in there. So that's giving a roughly $100 per animal just for the veterinary services. But please remember that once the vet is done with the spay and neuter program, we have to house them until they're recovered. We can't release them back out there with stitches and things like that. So there's other additional costs on that. For the 941 that we seized, if we were to have done an effective spay, trap, neuter, and release program, we would have been looking at about $90,000 just in the vet bills alone, not to mention our other involved costs, the time involved, the trapping, the releasing, the care and maintenance of them during the recovery period. We agree 100% with the advocates that is an effective tool. What we're saying is that the Please Stop Feeding the Feral Cats will also help us achieve our goals also, so that hopefully we get to the point where they can provide charitable funding or grants for a trap, neuter, and release program. But we don't want to wait for that eventuality when we can start attacking this problem right now with the Please Stop Feeding of the feral cats. But if we do proceed forward with a trap, neuter, release program, which it is an effective tool, it's just one of many tools, it does come with significant budgetary concerns.
Councilman McCarthy.
Is it permissible for the TNR group, is it permissible for them to go out and form the TNR Society of Casper, for lack of a better term, and legally trap, neuter, and release them within this ordinance?
So, Mayor, Councilman, that's an excellent question. You know, really, that trapping authority resides with us. But, you know, what they could do is certainly form that society to help fund the goals of that program. That would be of great assistance to us. But I think, you know, when it comes to the seizing of potential property belonging to others, you know, because some cats are not feral. And we don't want people to, you know, to just be capturing somebody's pet and neutering it and spaying it, and then we deal with the, holy cow, that was a ultra rare breed that we spent $30,000 for, and we were going to raise litters from. So you know, we have the ordinance authority to actually detain these animals and try to deal with them in a humane way. We wouldn't want to surrender that up to somebody else.
So basically, the way something along those lines could work then is you would still wind up with the catching of the animal. You would certify that it is not fluffy, and then turn it. No offense to cats, but you understand what I'm getting at, is you could then certify that it's not fluffy, and then you could turn it over to the TNR Society to go ahead and do their thing then. Is that supposedly the way it could potentially work?
That's certainly a possibility, Mayor. You know, certainly they could also, through their fundraising efforts and their charitable donations, they could fund the services of the veterinarian. Currently in the city of Cheyenne, they have a charitable organization that works with them that helps fund their staff. They have a staff veterinarian, you know, so it's on the city payroll. You know, and so they're able to do it. as efficiently as possible. So they have a program that's helping for them. It doesn't cure all feral cats. It's just another tool, but the city of Cheyenne, I'm very comfortable saying, would not be successful without that third-party charitable organization helping to fund the needs of that program. Otherwise, it is expensive.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. And thank you, animal control officers, for helping out with this. We definitely appreciate that.
Councilman Bates.
Regarding the feral cats, and this is going to probably come out really bad and probably get reported really bad. I'm going to take a shot in the dark anyways. But Mr. Justin, if you, or Police Chief, if you could answer this. In the county, it is legal to shoot cats. Is that accurate, because they are considered as a nuisance or I can't think of what the other animals are, but that they're similar to, they're considered as?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, yeah, cats, I couldn't tell you exactly the way the statute reads, but there's a statutory designation for how a feral cat is defined, and I believe it's a cat that occurs greater than 50 or 100 yards or something like that from a known residence. And there are no regulated methods of take or seasons or anything like that. They're basically considered a predator. A predator,
That's what I was thinking of. Now, that's legal for if you live in the county, correct?
Well, it would really be anywhere where discharge of firearms or anything like that is permitted. Folks would legally be allowed to take one.
Okay, and then so city limits, of course, that you can't unless you can get special permission from you, correct, Chief?
The discharge of any firearm within the city limits is prohibited without express permission. Our ordinance reads that through the permission of the city manager or his designee, and I have been acting as that designee. So that is the only permissible way to fire any projectile in the city of Casper is by that written permission.
Okay. And I'm hoping and assuming that that would not be something you would approve of, I guess, within the city.
Mayor.
I know it's a low question. I'm sorry. I'm just.
That's a question that I would love to answer. I do issue out nuisance permits, but the way our ordinance reads, when all other methods have failed.
Okay.
And so it's very hard for people to deal with, say, rock dove, the standard pigeon, because they congregate where they congregate. So that's one that's very hard for us to deal with, to scatter them and not have them come back. Whereas a cat, we have successful trapping methods of dealing with a nuisance cat. The whole goal of these ordinances is for us to reduce the number of cats that we are trapping and ultimately euthanizing. The animal advocates, my animal protection officers, and indeed everybody in this room wants to look out for the best welfare of all animals within our jurisdiction. And so we've got these coping mechanisms to deal with it. We're just trying to shore up some efficiency with our coping mechanisms to give relief to those who need relief, and still protect the animals it's all of our desires to make sure that the animals are treated humanely, that they thrive and they prosper, without interfering with the property rights of others. So we're trying to find that line between these opposing needs that meets everybody's needs. But in the end, cats are a nuisance. They do cause problems. They do cause property damage. And where they're allowed to congregate and become feral because somebody is choosing to feed them, we end up responding to that. And in fact, we went to one recently where the actual feeder of the cats has now become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of them. and was requesting assistance in dealing with the problem that they had helped generate. So we're just trying to bring as many tools to bear on some of these common problems as we can, and that's really the genesis of the ordinance changes that we've recommended for you.
So, last question. With all of you that deal with the feral cats in one way or another, even game and fish, what would be, and I know what we have in our ordinance, but do you guys all agree with the two top recommendation would be to stop feeding the feral cats and to do a capture, use the capture cage?
Mayor, I'm going to try to answer. I can feel the anxiety of the people behind me. There is no silver bullet to our feral cat problem. What we are recommending is that we're bringing forward some options, some tools, some of the things that we might consider, some of the things you might consider now, and some of the things you might consider when it's more economically feasible. Right now, we are advocating for let's stop feeding them. If council wants to consider, a future partnership with an organization that wants to assist with a successful trap, neuter, and release program, we would support that wholeheartedly. So for the time being, the programs that we have available to us is we trap them, we identify Fluffy, we try to get Fluffy home, but the ones that are feral, that we can't adopt those out, and it's on everybody's mission here in this room, in my animal protection officer ranks. The euthanasia of these animals is not what we want to do, but that's what we're being forced to do right now. So we're bringing you measures to reduce that unwanted side effect. But I'm not sure that we're bringing you a top one or two, because one of them has significant budgetary impacts that we may not be in a position today to consider, but perhaps in the future we might, or, hopefully the Society of Casper comes forward and says, we can assist with that. We would love to participate in such a program, because it helps. The problem that I get with the trap, neuter, and release is those cats keep getting trapped. And I keep sending my officers to deal with it. And then we identify, well, that's one that we've already dealt with, and so it's kind of counterintuitive that it was causing a problem at somebody's home. We trapped it, and then we go there and identify it as a one that we've pre-taken care of, ostensibly, and right there in front of the complainant, we release it as, oh, that's Jerry. We know Jerry. We've trapped him 32 times already. So it's there is a fine line that's very difficult. And part of the reason for these changes is I'm trying to make enforcement as efficient as possible, to give these officers, to arm them with the best tools possible to take enforcement when enforcement is needed, and that's generally after compliance has been flaunted.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
Just really quick, and I know that, feral dogs are not by any stretch of the imagination to the quantity level of feral cats, but when we first went through this, and I was first on council, we did have people coming to us and making comments about these dogs that were just roaming. They very clearly did not have a home that they belonged to. They were just kind of like a community dog. And I'm sorry, but somebody is probably feeding them. And so I understand that feral cats are like the true problem here, but in order to be all-encompassing, I really think it might be appropriate to address both the feeding of feral cats and feral dogs. Once again, I know that cats are really what the problem is, but there are feral dogs. I mean, they do exist.
Okay. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So a couple things on that. I guess I'd like to stress again, I wasn't quite aware that the extent of the feral cat problem that is being discussed here today, but I would just wholeheartedly again say that feral cats across the country and really the world are a huge concern for wildlife populations, whether it's cats in Australia and New Zealand. I mean, there's in egregious cases, there's examples of endangered species being irreparably harmed by feral cats. So the department wholeheartedly endorses minimizing the impacts of feral cats and dogs for that matter, the impact that they may have on wildlife populations, and taking whatever recourse is necessary that's also grounded in socially acceptable practices. And I certainly understand the dilemma that PD and Metro is facing with respect to this. It's not an easy solution. But the main thing that I did want to add is when I was up here earlier, I was remiss in not mentioning the fact that I will also be in front of the Natrona County Commission next week to also propose an extension of a feeding ban with respect to some of these wildlife species. And without interjecting the Wyoming Game and Fish Department into the cities and counties' business, to the extent I could, I would suggest that if the county commission were also to adopt a feeding ordinance, that and so then we can also encompass things like Casper Mountain and Mills and Evansville, that language be consistent to the extent possible with respect to individual species that we're talking about. And so I'm not really sure how to proceed with that, but I did want to let members of the council know that I'll be in front of the county commission next week.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I add one more thought? Sorry. On the feeding of the ferals. One other flip side of the reason I proposed it as well is in the last 4 or 5 days alone, I have picked up 7 baby raccoons out of people's yards that have become ill or just damaging. And it runs pretty coincidental with the people that are trapping feral cats. The feeding of those feral cats draws in the raccoons, it draws in the skunks, it draws in the nuisance wildlife. And that is another reason I had proposed that, just for your consideration.
Okay.
Did you want to add dogs, feral dogs, as well as with feral cats?
Everybody good with adding dogs on there?
As far as feeding non-domesticated animals, rabbits, do you want to add that with the birds and the squirrels?
I have not had any complaints about the rabbits.
Just to complicate things, families out there feeding the geese and ducks along the river.
Yep, that's why we were going to exclude fowl, because of that problem.
I think we're good with the feral dogs and cats for now. If we need to change at a later date or add to the list, I think we can. Everybody in agreement with that?
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
So clever.
Thank you.
All right. Is that it on the animal? Awesome. All right, let's move back to the downtown parking management update on RFP response process.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and I appreciate your willingness to adjust the agenda there. Thank you very much. As council is aware, we have engaged a process wherein we solicited RFPs and proposals for the operation and management and oversight of our downtown parking garage, as well as at Center Street, flat parking, if you will. And we did get 3 responses, 2 of which were from out-of-town management companies, and 1 of which was from our current management company, the DDA. Ms. Becker has been helping to oversee and facilitate that process. She was aided in her efforts by Vice Mayor Lutz. Thank you for that. And met with a couple other staff members as well to make up that committee to evaluate these responses and bring you a recommendation. And so for tonight's discussion, we wanted to walk through that process a little bit with you, discuss some of the differences, and identify who it is that we are recommending for the oversight of this facility, and get your direction one way or the other.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Becker?
Thank you. Mayor, members of council, and thank you, Mr. Napier, for the overview. We also have Tom Pitlick here this evening. He was on the committee, as well as Matt Thomason, who is our Buildings and Structures Manager for the City of Casper. So we really had a good cross-section. What we did was to, and in the memo, I incorporated what we looked at for the criteria. We actually went into this process with wanting to have a fresh lens on managing specifically, and most importantly, I think the parking garage. It is an asset. It's got a lot of potential down there. We are making capital improvements, continuing to make capital improvements to that facility. But it is truly, we had the downtown parking study done, getting people directed into that garage and not taking up space on our downtown streets has been just a goal of the downtown parking. We've talked about enforcement and having our police department making certain to get cars moved. So again, we are seeing turnover of the vehicles, and the structure is a perfect operation to see our citizens as well as our guests have a place to park and yet be convenient to all the downtown amenities that continue to blossom up around downtown Casper. So again, we went into this with a huge lens of wanting something that could be fresh and opportunity for further growth. With the objectives, we looked at a scoring matrix. The scoring matrix took into account the ability of a firm to understand what our needs are. Maintenance was a large component of that because we do want to keep that asset staffed well. Marketing and promotion, looking at really our fees and our methods of collection, and really an annual resource plan so we can get ahead of what our capital needs are. We looked at the qualifications of the firm and its management personnel. The third criteria, soundness of the operational approach, particularly, again, financial goals. We looked for cooperation from the firms, truly looking at a sensitivity for developing a partnership not only with the city, but with the public, as well as with the operator themselves. And then a commitment to making the parking facility contribute to the overall success, health, and vitality of the downtown core. We tried to echo that throughout the RFP. So we put together the scoring criteria in a matrix, and the 4 committee members scored independently of one another, and then we came together to look at what the totals looked out to be. Of the 3 firms, Republic Parking with a Denver operation scored the highest, followed by Interstate Parking, again another group that has a Denver operation, and then lastly was the Downtown Development Authority. We called all 3 firms and had an interview scheduled, and we did that via Zoom, and we're able to have multiple participants from each of the firms on those calls with the 4 of us. So I know that the 2 out-of-state firms have been in constant contact with Casper and really expressing a good interest in wanting to have a base operation here and to develop a marketing concept around Park Casper. So I wanted to hit some of the high points with you. With Republic Parking, which again was the highest scoring, some of the concepts that they came up with, they came and did a personal site visit, came up on their own, which we found out through the interview process, toured not only the parking facility but the surface lot. They then incorporated those findings and what their own personal experiences were. They did a lot of counts into their revenue projections as well as their operational plans that they proposed in the RFP. Republic Parking is proposing to pay us a lease of $4,000 a year, which is comparable with what we have now, but they did offer up a very substantial profit sharing opportunity, and I think that's what popped for me personally as well as with some of the other committee members. Currently, we have a profit sharing component in our lease with the Downtown Development Authority. Any of our net income that is over their revenue projections, anywhere from up to $20,000 has a 10% profit sharing that comes back to us. We have unfortunately not seen that with the operations for at least the last 2 years, if not 3. The profit sharing that Republic is proposing is right at 30%. Their revenue projection is $172,000 this next year. That does compare up to what the DDA had projected, which was about $125,000. Republic sees some lost revenue that they believe that they can capture through an aggressive marketing campaign. They want to join the Chamber of Commerce if they are selected, work with the downtown businesses and really get to understanding what the needs are, not only for employees, but what our citizens are wanting and the businesses themselves are wanting, and partnering on parking. They are interested in our wayfinding plan, which we'll be discussing a little bit later this evening. They do have a graphic artist on staff that they would like to incorporate into designing graphics for a park Casper plan that would segue with our wayfinding artwork. They're taking a high initiative in their proposal. They want to have a parking advisory board. That one interested me. I have to say, a lot of what we do with parking, we talked about, again, our downtown parking plan. We spent a lot of last fall talking about parking. But to have a parking advisory board that we can really, we've been successful with that. You all have assigned committees. You have created those of citizens. This would be something new for Casper, and I think the time is right for that. I did check their references. They had worked with the City of Omaha, the City of Tacoma, and the City of Cedar Rapids. All very positive feedback. What else I'm interested in is the monthly reporting, and I think that's something that being able to know what we are bringing in on a monthly basis from a revenue projection, but also the numbers. I can't say that I am astute at knowing how many people are utilizing our downtown parking facilities, whether they are businesses or even our guests. And I think getting that level of reporting would be something that, again, our community is ready for. They have a significant staff training. They would be employing a parking supervisor. They have a work order program that they utilize for maintenance, which again, our our buildings and structures manager was most interested in with the work order process so that we could stay on top of maintenance needs. The other entities, interstate parking, again, strong interview. They are very much into a lot of automation. And again, I think that's great, but I believe as we worked through this, automation is a nice asset, but again, having a personal contact with our citizens and not just being able to pull in and out without ever seeing a person. I think our community is far more into some interaction with our citizens as well as our guests. And so having parking ambassadors is an important aspect too of the proposal. The interstate proposal, even though solid, really took quite a bit into actually looking at assets from street parking. And we were strictly looking, in fact, at the parking garage and the surface lot. And their marketing plan was not as strong as what Republic had presented. Their references were also well received with the City of Idaho Springs, Duluth. They got back to me. Breckenridge and Fargo I had reached out to also. I did not hear back. Interstate also has a strong monthly reporting system, which again is an asset, I believe, of where we need to be as a municipality. The DDA, energetic, very interested in continuing to be a vital part of our downtown successes. They did have a good turnout from their board representatives. I would say, again, their need for parking and continuing to promote all of the activities that they are working on. Parking is important to them, and again, utilizing that parking garage and having it used so that they can continue to host huge events and get folks safely to those events. And also patronizing businesses down there is, again, still a huge motivation for the DDA. So that was kind of the overview of what some of the high points were with the interviews. So again, I felt that you all would have questions for myself as well as our committee members, both our vice mayor as well as our finance director. It's a 4-year agreement, again, and I think you all saw that in the memo, which would begin September 1st.
Councilman Powell.
I'll start. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Liz, how many sites are we obligated to provide the tenants at the Wyoming National Bank building?
Your Honor.
And what percentage of the garage is taken up with that?
Okay. Your Honor and members of council, very good question. Again, we have right at 489 spots in that parking structure. 45 5 are dedicated to the Wyoming Bank building tenants. They are on the top floor in the uncovered section.
Councilman Bates?
I don't have a question or just more of a recommendation or hearing everything that she had to say about the Republic, with the amount of information that they gave, I have to say that would be, I think, very beneficial to us in Casper, but also to the citizens of Casper if they deliver everything that she just said that they would do. So I'm more in favor of them. So.
Another question, unless there's somebody else.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Liz, we're not done with the capital improvements to the garage. We've talked about pretty significant investment in a card reader program. Were any of their projections as far as income predicated on the completion of those improvements?
Your Honor, members of council, we did, Republic in particular has been studying our market. They got in, they were looking at news stories. So they're very well aware that we are starting on the cameras. And again, those projects, the city manager had asked for the bid proposal to be put together, and I think I reported that to the DDA also. So the 22 security cameras, all 3 groups understood we were beefing up the internal security. That would work well with some of the license plate reader technology that the 2 firms outside of Casper had. And as far as the arms and the access control system, again, the firms, we haven't moved forward with that because one of the questions on the interview was, do you have, who do you work with currently with the systems that you have in place in these other communities? What we didn't want to do was to go out to bid on a piece of equipment if they already have technology in place. The DDA is aware of that, so we had gotten a temporary fix for the the ticket arms for the current parking structure and the system that we currently have with the press tickets. But as we move towards access control as an option for our monthly users or our long-term users to be able to have credit card machines, this was all part of the interviews to see if we could beef that technology up, but still be able to take $3 from a customer that wants to pay cash. And so in particular, the DDA could accommodate that as well as Republic. Interstate was very much, I felt, into credit card paying and prepaying. So we are continuing with those capital investments, but the timing was good to just slow it a bit with the access control, and then we'll move forward, and the signage.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
Just a quick question, or sorry, gosh, just a quick comment about a question that I was pretty adamant in the interviews about was, I mean, when I travel, I literally just pull up an app on my phone and say, where do I park? And it tells me like, hey, you can park here for $2, or hey, you can park there for $6. And both Republic and Interstate offer options like that. As far as like, there will just be a website called like parkcasper.com where if I were whatever pulling into town and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go walk around downtown, like where should I park my car? I can take care of all of it before I'm even there. And so, I mean, that's huge in the sense of if we're really trying to pull, I mean, not only local people, but especially people traveling in to have these other options versus, I mean, it would also include a parking ambassador that is, you know, readily available and always stationed and always available to people coming in and parking. So I think it'll look a lot different and it'll be utilized a lot higher.
Thank you for that.
I guess I have one question. Were all 3, did all 3 say that they were confident that there would be profit sharing at the end of the year? Would they come out on the positive side?
Your Honor, no. That was not conveyed by all 3.
Okay.
The DDA has reported a loss. I mean, that's in their budget that eventually you all will see that they're projecting a loss. And then Interstate did not even mention the profit sharing. which we asked them about specifically in some of the revenue questions, but they did not provide that detail, which, again, we made a couple of attempts to ask that question.
So Republic's the only one then?
It really defined it.
Okay, all right.
The DDA is aware of it because it's in the current contract. We just have not had that
Correct.
success. But with that comes the strength in marketing and pursuing that revenue, whether it's apps, which would be something absolutely new for our facility, or just looking at collections and physically being on site with collections, but also pursuing billing and anyone that's not paying, just really having the strength to go after that.
One more question, Mr. Mayor, if I may?
Councilman Powell.
So, Liz, when you were doing your reference checks, did any of these communities have a similar problem where they had sort of an albatross facility that nobody really wanted to use, which is, I mean, it just doesn't have a good reputation. We've tried to improve the lighting and the paint and other things, the restrooms, but it still is the first place people look to park. So did any of these communities have a similar problem that Republic had some success with?
Your Honor, members of council, I did not specifically ask about their albatross facilities.
Maybe that's unfair.
No, that's fine. What I asked about was communication between the municipality and the parking firm. Because I just think that the communication is critical so that we do know, not only from maintenance, but reporting and into doing monthly reports as provided to council. I asked about responsiveness to issues, and then I also asked about the partnership with the city. So it was communication, responsiveness with the partnership with the city, being able to make certain that they know what our needs are, what our objectives are, what our goals are. So I did not get down to please describe the facilities in your.
But they did look at it.
Yes.
Councilman Cathy.
Basically, what we're doing here is, only it's with parking as opposed to doctors, but you don't go to a GP, which is the DDA, to get a knee replacement. You go to the orthopedic surgeon to get a knee replacement. We are now going to a business that deals and develops, and their primary function is parking, not a secondary function, which I am thinking that basically that's really what we're looking for, is somebody that makes a living out of parking. And I hate to take it from the DDA, but they have had it now for several years, and we have seen nothing but our monthly income. And I'm wondering if it isn't time to go to a business that markets parking, markets, I can't get it out.
And Your Honor and Councilman,
Yeah.
I was delighted that we were able to get some responses this time from out of state. And the research of what this council has done, again, with the downtown parking study, that had garnered, I mean, with social media, they were doing their research on the progressiveness of Casper and wanting downtown parking. They were curious also on the enforcement, the partnership with the police department. That's important too. It's not just working with, you know, Liz and Matt and Tom on monthly reports. It's getting out also and working with our police department and making certain that we are having enforcement on the streets, but the communication is with that team also. So that, I thought, you know, they have done the research, and we as a community have finally gotten some attention of some actual firms that are saying, yeah, we'd like to be a part of this market. They see revenue potential, and that's exciting also for us. But to have the ability to have a facility and an asset work to its performance, I think that will be something neat to come back in a year when we're doing budget and kind of look at what this investment has done for all of us. I'm curious about that.
I do have one question more as a follow-up. Is there a cancellation clause in the contract?
Yes. And
Well, what I'm interested in is, this is
If
a
it's-
4-year contract, and if in 18 months from now, they have made everybody so mad that,
we had that with the DDA, the ability, if performance was not to that level, that we can do that. But if it is council's desire, I mean, we have not crafted the contract for this new entity. So our trustee and true city attorney is listening, as I am, to something like this too.
I guess I don't mind going with an out-of-state, out of whatever, but I think any new contract, we should have an opt-out in there.
Well stated.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to confess that I have a fairly strong prejudice in favor of dealing with local entities. But I think, you know, we've beat this parking issue around every direction that we could. I have to agree with all of the things that Councilman Cathy has said. And I would just suggest let's move forward with this Republic outfit and see if we can ultimately come to satisfactory terms with them.
All right, this sounds like that's the direction we're wanting to go, so to move forward with Republic. Okay.
That was the one you had recommended, wasn't it?
Your Honor, yes. I do, but it is hard because of the TDA. And again, we are very supportive of them, and
Reporting a loss.
will be, Republic would work with them to find out what their needs are.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the Amoco Reuse Joint Powers Board bylaws. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is a relatively simple item that nonetheless requires your blessing to move forward. The Amoco Property Reuse Joint Powers Board would like to change the terms of their bylaws as it relates to continued tenure of a board member, so that indeed, instead of serving for 2 consecutive terms before being required to lay off for a year, they be allowed to serve for 3 consecutive terms prior to that period of time being off the board. Their concern is that they're having a difficulty maintaining the appropriate amount of institutional knowledge for the period of time that they would like to have, and as well as generating volunteer interest on a consistent basis. And so the bottom line request is to see whether or not you agree with those ideas, and if so, we can fill out the letter that would capture that desire of yours, or concurrence, if you will, and we'll get it back to the board and have them change those terms, if you will.
And Mr. City Manager, if I'm reading this right, they're looking for permission from both us and the county on this.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. The city and the county are the joint powers, if you will, that are part of this board.
Councilman Cathy.
Yes, I didn't see in this memo anywhere where it said how long is the current term?
Oh.
Councilman Hawkins, do you remember? Sorry?
It's 4.
4 years?
I think so. 3 or 4. Yeah, Liz is saying 3, and she's probably right.
Okay. Does that help?
Probably right.
So we're going from basically 6 years within a year layoff to now 9 years.
That's correct.
Yeah. Just Councilman Pacheco.
Traditionally, I'm against, I think people can be on boards, and I think people can be on even councils way too long. And I think that it's one of those things that, I know there are board members in this community that have been on there for 20, 30 years, and I think that that's great for institutional knowledge to some extent. But I also think that there also comes a time too where there has to be a level of transition and other people and new voices to be on that. And I think we should While I'll support this, I was just kind of looking at the mayor here. If it was 4-year terms, I would vote against it, because I think that's a long time to be on a board. So my point, I guess, is that I think we need to move forward cautiously, because that Joint Powers Board is a very powerful board in this community. And I think we need to have good people on there. I think we need to have diverse people on that board, and I think we need to look at that and start seeing the how that transition is, and overturning people to see who can come on there. Younger people, good people that can have good ideas can be on that board. And that's something I think that we need to do. So I'll vote for this to move forward with it. I don't want to make this a big convoluted thing, because it was supposed to be a quick thing. But I certainly want to make sure that that we look at those things and we have a good movement of people on those boards. Thank you.
Councilman Powell?
No, I'm sorry.
You're good? Okay, Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the reasons, and I have served on that board for a long time, but one of the reasons that we need this in this position is because it's basically a development organization. Not part of the city, not part of the county, but a development organization that has a responsibility to develop the Amoco properties. And in the world's market today, that's been a difficult issue. And so we ended up hiring another company to be, quote, our real estate outfit, so to speak. And that was after about 6 years of operating without anybody in that position. It took a long time to get that done. Another area where we have, and this is where the institutional knowledge comes in. You can say, you know, we had some interest in that piece of property 3 years ago or 4 years ago, and where is that now? So you have to look at that. But the other thing we really have a little problem with is they're responsible. They have an asset value of some $20-some million. And so you need to be looking out for that. If they don't handle that money well with people that have good knowledge and good accounting knowledge, quite honestly, it's going to end up back when the county and the city are going to have to run it. And right now we have a golf course that loses money. It's losing less than it has been. And so it's headed the right direction. But as you're aware, there are other negotiations going on regarding our property. So it's just kind of nice to have somebody on there that's been there quite a while. Thank you.
Well, I guess along the lines, is there not, it's 2 consecutive right now, but then they can do a 1-year break and then come back into it too, right? So, and if it's 3 years, then it would be 6 years on and potentially 1 year off, and then they could come back on.
That's right, Mr. Mayor. I think it's 3 consecutive terms if you adopt this.
Yeah, but I'm saying right now, it's 6 years.
Correct.
They could take a year off and come and do 6 more years if they want. I assume that the concern would be that if you take a year off, it's like leaving high school and not going to college. If you take a year off, you're not gonna go back.
Yeah, we have had this happen once for sure. We had one member who was on it for the term, and he took off a year, came back and did it for 3 more years, and he says, no, I'm really done now.
Well, and I'm just saying, saying that in lines with what Councilman Pacheco's saying. You know, the way it's set up now, I agree that if you get somebody in there for 9 years, or if it's 12 years or whatever, like, you do need turnover at some point. If somebody really wants to remain on a board, they could be on it for 6 years if it is three-year terms. They could be on it for 6 years, take a year off, and come back and be on another 6. So I don't know. I'm kind of leaning, and I know you said you're voting for this, and I'll do the same. But Mayor,
can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not a math person. I'm a social worker and a teacher, so that taught history and government and taught government. So I just did the math. That's 9 years on being on a board consecutively. I didn't really put that into perspective. And Councilman Hopkins correct. It's a $20 million. It's a powerful board, probably the most powerful board in this town, I would say, bar none. And I would go to Matt with anybody that would say anything different because of $20 million. I know this was supposed to be a very simple conversation and approval. I'll support it, but with the reservation, 9 years is a long time to be on a board with that kind of influence in this community. And I would encourage more people, younger entrepreneurs, younger business people to get involved on that board. If there's not, but to see younger people. I think we need younger voices, especially on this council, but also on other boards in this community. It's time to start seeing some movement, I think, in that direction. So that would be my encouragement. I'll support it, but with great reservation. Thank you.
Councilman Cathy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the reasons I asked about how long the term was, we're talking about 9 years, but by the same token, and I think Councilman Pacheco alluded to it as well, if they were 4-year terms, it would be 8 years with two terms. Going with this for 3 terms at 3, we're talking about a year's difference. That's not going to make that much difference from that standpoint. So by the fact that they are 3-year as opposed to 4-year, I think it's quite acceptable to go with the 3 terms. But if they were 4 years, 12 years, way too long.
I'm going to regret saying this, Mr. Mayor, but I'm going to say it anyway. The reason we have a golf course there instead of a baseball complex is because old white guys made this decision, and old white guys golf. And it's lost money, and they sold it to us because it was going to make money. And it never has. And so, I mean, I understand what Ray is saying, that those things become kind of incestuous when the same people are making those decisions over and over again. So I'll support it because I know this was unanimously requested by the board, or we wouldn't be looking at it. But it is important, and I always regretted that I didn't speak up during that process, and none of us did. There are some costs to having the same people running the show over and over again.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Huber.
I'll probably support this also, but I have one question and then and a comment, but I'll make my comment first. I think some of us are kind of expressing a little bit of trepidation about this, but say we're going to support this anyway. I wonder if it wouldn't be valuable to put a footnote on that support saying, but we really think it would be a good idea to have some turnover on that board too, and try to recruit in some new members and some new blood. Having said that, how is it that these people are selected?
That's what my question was going to be.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Huber, generally what happens is there is a level of solicitation process that occurs at the board level. They generate a list of applicants, if you will, and typically speaking, they have a recommendation that the council votes upon, and that person is seated. Which isn't inconsistent with regard to how a lot of your other committees are appointed. There's been variations of participation by the council in over the years with respect to appointing committee members and so on. And some of you will actually recall that council had a requirement for a brief time where those candidates would come into the council and be introduced at the very least, and council would say hello and in some rare cases ask a question or two, and then we'd move on. So there's a number of ways council can be more involved if council would prefer, but that typically is what happens.
Councilman Pacheco.
So just looking at the members, and there are great members, and I know 99% of them, there are great members on here, and they're good people in this community, and they do that. There's one woman on there, and I think we need that representation on there. So I think in the future going forward, and I know I've got 2 years left on my second term here, and looking at that, but we need to also look at that and say there needs to be greater representation on that. So I would encourage, to see a greater representation. There's one on there who was Brooke Kaufman, who's fantastic, an amazing person in this community, and a commissioner. And so looking at those things, so I mean, I would say our goals need to be looking at that down the road as there needs to be greater representation of women on that board, and I think younger people, 20s, 30s, I think is probably what we need to be looking at. I'm done. I'm not going to talk about this again, Carter.
Anybody else? Councilman Bates?
So what I hear from most of the council, you have reservations of passing this or going through, but you're willing to go through anyways. So I guess my question to you, Carter, regarding this is, do you have to have an answer from council today regarding this, or is this something that some of the questions that council asked or brought up that, you know, better turnovers or whatever, is that something that we can take back to them and say, this is something council was thinking? What do you guys think before council does decide what they want to do? Because that worries me, that there's reservations regarding it, but yet we're going to do it anyways. I don't agree with that. So is that something that can be done, or do you have to have an answer tonight?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, it is not my impression that there is some timely issue on the very near horizon that needs to be addressed by virtue of you know, an emergency appointment of folks. I do know that we are losing some folks that would otherwise continue to serve if indeed these consecutive terms and that tenure could be extended. And, you know, the board is worried about losing that institutional knowledge in the absence of some of the other interest among the community. But far be it for me to say that council couldn't entertain this topic in another work session, an additional work session, pre-meeting or whatever you'd prefer to entertain some questions with Ms. Hahn, for example, and maybe even her board chair, if that would be of interest to the council.
Mr. Mayor?
Here, let me come back to you in a minute. Councilman Cathy.
I am believing, aren't we invited, along with the county commissioners, any of us that want to go, to a joint board meeting of this board coming up in September? Isn't that? I was looking now, I didn't see this, and I'm thinking that if we're willing to wait, delay, whatever, when we go to that board meeting, we could definitely bring up these concerns about better representation, how we ought to try to move forward with that, so that, you know, we have a direct input coming up here in the next 60 days.
Councilman Huber.
Mr. Mayor, the point that I was going to make is that this is one of those issues that we can sit and we can delay and we can wring our hands and we can, oh my goodness, I wish that we knew more stuff and blah, blah, blah and all that stuff. It is not, the issue is not going to resolve itself if we put it off and wait. The issue is not going to become any more or less clear than it is now. This is something, like I say, we can wring our hands and put it off or move forward. Let's move forward because it ain't going to get any better if we put it off.
Councilman Hopkins.
10 seconds. This group appoints one person every year to that board, and so does the county. The appointed lady on there is Brooke Coughlin. Okay? The last lady we had on there was Laura Angelo, and she served for 2 full terms.
All right, so you're looking for direction to, I just had to make sure nobody else had any questions. So direction to move forward on this. Okay, so I guess give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, direction to move forward with going to a third.
I have no comment to it.
Okay, majority says yes. Okay, we'll move on to the implementation options 2020 Casper Area Wayfinding Master Plan. Mr. City Manager.
Now, this item might be a little more difficult. So please bring your questions. I'm trying to de-jinx the next issue, I guess, is what I'm doing. I apologize. Oh, my goodness. Council is familiar with the efforts to build a wayfinding master plan. In fact, many of you participated in the feedback sessions and rated the design choices and all those kinds of things. Council will also recall that that plan was largely funded by federal dollars that made this happen for us. We are at the point now where we need to have some level of consideration as it relates to the ways in which we can implement this plan. And as luck would have it, of course, the implementation for this is not cheap. And it couldn't come at probably a worse time in terms of considering implementation. So I want to tell you from the get-go that indeed the cost to implement are things that and concerns that Liz and I have talked quite a bit about, and certainly Director Becker is very aware of our concerns and very aware of the issues surrounding generating the money to put all this into place. Nonetheless, you know, the community has identified this as a priority. It certainly, I think, is consistent with the goals that you've set as a body. And I would tell you that with all that in motion and at play, we still have to be really concerned about how it is that we can put this into effect. Liz has some additional information for you tonight, as well as an approach that council could consider to make this happen. I'm grateful to know that the beginning portions of this plan, while late at this point in time, certainly is not one of those things that couldn't wait until we get closer to the new fiscal year and understand our financial situation better to make happen. And I think that's a lot of what you'll hear tonight. But if you have questions, if you have thoughts or concerns, please let's bring those up as well and have the opportunity to converse about this. But if it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to defer to Liz to walk us through some more of the detail of this plan.
Mayor, members of
Thank you.
council. Carter queued it up quite well, and what I'd like to do first is to, yes, could we put, perfect. A few of the slides that were in your packet, I wanted to have pulled up. That's kind of an eye chart. But can we drill it in? So what that says, and you all might be looking at it, but from
Looks like page 123
yeah,
in our
it's,
packet. Oh, does it?
it does, that far right-hand column. Yeah, that's exactly what that number looks like. What we had in the wayfinding plan is implementation suggestion for a phased implementation into 2 phases, and then also provided in this plan, which is approved there in March, is a capital plan. The idea behind the entire MPO funded activity was that we would be rolling out an implementation as a group. So the 5 other entities that did this plan with us, one set of signs works with the other. And I know that the county is particularly interested. Brooke's been asking, as well as Commissioner Bertolio, what our city plans are going to be. So I wanted to at least get some direction forward today. With the implementation, we are looking at 185 signs that were proposed for the Casper area. And we're going to move the slide here in a minute. The unit price that came out of the proposal that the consultants had played with, which was about $6,500 for a sign. Then they had, in this particular slide, put together an additional cost that if we wanted to use a general contractor to install the signs, again, we're talking half of that for phase one, then there would be an additional cost to hiring a general contractor. The staff has talked that would be something that we feel that we could work with in-house. And then there's a contingency, as there is with all contracts, and then what Councilman Kathy had indicated, again, for 185 wayfinding signs, we would be looking at potentially a total of 1.6, which could be reduced again from the general contractor cost and what I foresee as a lower unit price. Let's switch now, if we could, Carter, to the next. I want to go over a couple slides over. Yes, sir. As part of the implementation, we are looking strictly at priority one to get us going, which are the areas of Casper Mountain. This is, I'm just going to repeat this in case there's folks watching from home. Casper Mountain came out as a high Casper area destination. The airport was a priority one. Downtown Casper, we'll come back to that in a second, was a high priority. Fort Casper was high, as well as the National Historic Trails Interpretive Center. Again, remember that there was significant public input from all over the area. We got out there and did a lot of public outreach in many different parts of the county. Then we jumped to a priority two. The plan with rolling out phase one would be to look at both priority one and priority two locations. And such locations in priority two do pick up our sister communities of bar none Evansville Mills, as far out as Alcova, but also priority two for our municipality would pertain with Casper College, David Street Station, Hogadon, getting up to Rotary Park. The Tate Geological Museum is in that. We're looking at the high school as well as the old Yellowstone District. Let's go to the next slide. What I've done here is to pull out a subset of the master plan. And again, the master plan, as most of you remember, is a very large document. So I pulled out a sample of what the consultant had put together for vehicular directional destinations. This particular section is one that identifies destinations and signage that would get us into the downtown. Since priority one, I wanted you to look at the number of signs, which are the little black circles that are related to priority one with the downtown core, a significant number that we would be able to accommodate with phasing into this. So some of the locations that are identified as priority ones would be getting people off the interstate at Center Street, and then that would begin to direct people down to Casper Mountain if they wanted to continue on Center Street, City Hall, as well as David Street Station, and we would continue down Center Street. We would be further directed to such locations as the library, the parking garage. We would also be further directed not only into the downtown core, but also be able to get into the old Yellowstone District and also directional over to Amico Park. Again, walking the trails and getting into that location. So the directional signs, and Carter, if you would take that next slide, I want them to, again, look at some of the artwork. You're familiar with the logo and the artwork. The signage we limited to 3 to 4 locations per sign. Nobody can see more than that as they are driving. These signs are again about 6 feet. Yeah, 3 by 6. I apologize. I'm trying to go by memory. So they are sizable and they're pole mounted. What I'm looking at this evening, as far as what Carter indicated, as far as some options, I personally would like to see us go out for an RFP. I'd like us to go out locally. I believe we have talented sign companies that can look at this artwork. I think there is sincere interest. When this plan hit the press back in March, yes, I was contacted by a lot of out-of-state sign contractors. But I look at the talent that we have here, the opportunity to start local, and I would like to see us issue one, and I truly believe that that unit price at $6,500 can come down. Case in point, we're working on some other signage for some of our facilities, and being able to see some solid bids coming in from Superior, who just did a fabulous sign at Life Steps Campus, working with Bar D for some other signs up Bryan Stock Trail. Nick's Signs has done some great stuff for Casper. Again, I see the talent here. If we're able to go out, I could come back to this body, if you all are still interested in examining this project a little bit further, come back here in a few months and look at maybe some revised costs. Again, you're looking at that narrow strip that totals to 1.6 million in very tough economic times. If we're able to go out and look perhaps at half that quantity for phase one and get some bids put together for this signage, they could look at our artwork, and then we could talk about that and have a better feel on how our economy is progressing. But again, I don't want to necessarily go down the road of an RFP if you all have some doubts on this, but that's where I'm at.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
Let's say we do move forward and get some favorable RFPs, where would this be funded out of?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, Vice Mayor Luz, I couldn't tell you right now. I mean, I think the Opportunity Fund may be something you want to consider. Certainly a phased approach, in my estimation, would be the best approach, and that might open up some opportunities for funding. But I certainly wouldn't want to do it on the backs of operational funding that we would that is scarce right now. But we would try to generate some options for you to consider, if at all possible.
Councilman Kathy.
The map that you showed with the signs on them on the previous slide, was that just the phase one, or was that 1 and 2 for Casper?
Your Honor, Councilman, excellent question. That was just a sampling. It was not all of just phase one. It was just a sampling of the number of signs in downtown. What I wanted to project with that is a total of 185 signs for a community. That's a lot of signs for Casper, but I wanted you to see the density and the number that would get you into the downtown area and then to the other priority one areas. So no, I would have to probably pull together some of the other graphics to get you one that is strictly phase one.
The reason I was asking that is, just quickly counting, there were either 57 or 58
Correct.
signs just on that one slide, which you're approaching a third of.
The phase one.
But that's why I was wondering if that was all
That
of
is
phase
a lot
one
of the
even.
density, but what we did not have in there were the signs that would be from the airport. Was missing as a priority one. We were missing some of the interpretive signs as you come down for the Historic Trails Center, which is a priority one. As you come south on I-25, you're also missing some of the signs to get you to Fort Casper from West Casper. So I consolidated it right into the heart, but I wanted you to look at some of the density that we're talking about, especially to get folks off the interstates and be able to have them maneuver when they get into our downtown.
So we're probably looking at close to half of that 185 to get through 1 and 2.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Hopkins.
Are there any duplicates?
No.
Okay.
Your Honor, no.
That's what I was wondering if there's.
No. You're going to see even on these
Hospital,
examples.
ought to be more than one sign.
No. Yeah, correct. You're going to see duplicates as far as David Street Station might be on a couple of different signs depending on the direction, but the sign is not going to be the same one all the way down.
Okay.
For instance, Center Street or 2nd Street. There's the variety.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the primary goals here is to increase economic activity. Do you think there's any potential of a private-public partnership to enlist the private sector in helping to fund this.
Your Honor? Sure. I'll tell you, Brooke has been particularly creative as a commissioner, and she had set aside some funding even with Visit Casper funds, which we already have in our coffers here reserved. And I believe that this steering committee that we worked with was very versatile in their interest areas, and it would probably be something that we could play with. I would like to have some solid costs for those signs and then begin to approach some of our business partners or the private sector on that. But case in point, the hospital, and if there's an opportunity, perhaps the college, and if we're going to try to get groups to some of those entities, even as far as our friends with the BLM, getting folks to the National Historic Trails Center, will it take effort on our committee's part? Yeah. But I think there is merit to beginning to look at that and see if we could get some sponsorships. And you betcha.
This sign paid for by Backwards Distillery.
So direction then on this, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at doing a RFP then, or going out to RFP to see if we can get it locally here at
a competitive rate.
Competitive rate?
Yeah,
That's the word I'm
that's
looking
what we're
for.
hoping.
Okay.
We're hoping.
All right. Do you need a thumbs up from us? Okay.
So you still like the idea?
We still like the idea.
So we'll be back.
And I like the idea of saving money right now.
I'm into that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda review. Anybody have anything on next week's, or Mr. City Manager on next week's agenda?
Mr. Mayor, we will have a discussion as it relates to the budget amendment to wrap up fiscal year 20. And so I would propose that we take some time in the pre-meeting to go over some of that data, although it won't be a significant amendment with, new expenses that we're requesting and all that kind of thing. So that would be what I would propose. Certainly, the conversation about the animal control and care ordinance will generate some interest, I'm sure, given that that will be our first reading, if I remember correctly. And otherwise, Mr. Mayor, I think that would be all that I have.
Good. Anybody else got anything? Okay, we'll move on to legislative review. Mr. City Manager.
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Excellent. Not excellent. Councilman Kathy.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah, I had missed this the first time. Are we definitely going to open Hogadon this winter? And the reason I'm asking that is one of the things we're approving on consent is $67,000, almost $68,000 for servicing the chairlift. And if we're not going to open, do we need to spend that money?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kathy, that's an important question. And at this point in time, we have budgeted the subsidy for Hogadon into the fiscal year 21 budget. And so I would propose that, unless things get worse substantially from what we've projected so far, we plan to move forward with an opening this season. And by the way, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kathy, could be the first season that we have full-blown night skiing. So hopefully that will portend to better financial times for that facility.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll start Councilor on table. Councilman Kathy.
I think I'm done for tonight.
All right. Councilman Hopkins.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one comment. I know some of my colleagues are wearing masks. I'm not because we're 6 feet apart, but Admiral Jarrah, our testing czar, says that if we could achieve 90% compliance with wearing masks, we would defeat this virus. In our community, my casual observation is we're probably less than 50%. And that's got to change, or I'm afraid we're going to be the next Arizona. So let's hope I'm wrong.
Councilman Pacheco.
Thank you. Just two thoughts. Not to belabor the Amoco Reuse Joint Powers Board, I think there are, if you look at the Congress and you look at several people that are in those positions for 20, 30, 40 years, not that 9 years is bad, I think that becomes a gridlock that we see in our American politics. I think there's a state legislator that's been in for 40 years in our community. I think it's too long, and I'm not going out personally attacking anybody, but it's too long. And I think people need to take and observe and understand when it is time to step back and let other voices be heard, let our other generations come forward to start to lead. And when I thought I was the cool hip guy at one point in my 30s, I'm now in my 40s, and I start to find that I'm starting to lose a step with the younger generation. And I think it's a good idea for us to hear that younger generation and my continued support of young people. And so it's good to see young people running for office and doing that. And I would encourage young people to get involved in the Joint Powers Board, any other boards that are in the community, and be a part of that process and to run for political office. And I would gently encourage people that have been in political office for way too long to start to think about other things and start thinking about it's time to move forward and have other people be a part of that conversation. So, and I forgot the other thing that I was going to say. Oh, I would like to reiterate that too. I would encourage people to think about when they're in public, in large spaces, to wear a mask. It certainly does help, and there is data proven to that, contrary to I know a lot of people that say that there's not that data. I would encourage people to do that in large places. I was in Colorado this weekend for a basketball tournament. Masks were required in all public places. I'm not saying we'll go that direction, but I'm saying that if people voluntarily started to do that, I would like to see that happen. So hopefully people can make that decision. Thank you.
Councilman Huber.
Two things. One, I noticed in the newspaper, former council member Linda Korber, who served, I believe, back in the late 80s, early 90s, died. She, you know, if you asked her, well, what would you want to be remembered as? I think she'd say, well, I just wanted to be remembered as a working girl that did my best and on the council, tried to represent real people. She was a nice lady, and I just wanted to remember her. At the risk of beating on the mask business anymore, I'm always really sensitive, or at least I try to be, to the appearance of privilege. I have to say that I was a little bit bothered here tonight. Everybody that came in to sit out there in the audience had to have on a mask. And I looked up here, several of you are not wearing masks. I worry that that looks like, oh, we're privileged, we don't have to do that. But even though you're all 6 feet apart out there, you guys all have to have on a mask. I think that has the potential of having some real bad looking optics, and I hesitate to say that because I consider every one of you guys to be a friend, and I like all of you, and I really respect all of you, and I hate saying anything negative about anything. But anyway, that's all.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a few things. One, I went over Zoom meeting with historical preservation. One of the things that I want to bring up is that here soon they're going to be celebrating 100 years of Nolan Feed here in Casper, which is I think is awesome. A business that's been here for that long. And so I hope that if they do a big celebration of it, that council will consider going and showing their support to them, because they have supported Casper for a very long time. Family owned, family ran, so I have a huge respect for them. Reminder to people that Morad Park is going to be closed here soon, so you won't be able to drive down there and let your dogs out and stuff. So wanted to throw that out there. A couple other things that has bothered me that I saw in Facebook today was about David Street Station being vandalized. And then also heard about Game and Fish vehicles out at Alcova having the oil filter taken off or loosened, and there's just a lot of not a lot, there's a few bad things that's going on. Some cars being vandalized, being broke into. So I just ask that Casper, when you're driving around, drive a little bit slower, especially at night. Look around, and if you see something suspicious, I ask that you call it in, because it may protect a business, an entity, a homeowner, whoever, and especially like David Street Station for what they did. That disgusts me that somebody would do that. So I just wanted to bring those up, and that's it.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
And thank you, Ken, for bringing that up. That was my one comment tonight, was I keep hearing these very distasteful comments that, well, there's nothing to do, so the kids resort to vandalizing. Well, I'm sorry, but the excuse of having nothing to go and do doesn't justify illegal and criminal behavior. And so just a reminder to anybody out there justifying their behavior because these darn kids had their summer taken away, that doesn't justify them being criminals. And so we really need to curb the vandalism problem.
Right, then I have just a couple of things to cover. I had an opportunity to be up in Grand Targhee, and they have taken their ski hill and turned it into trails. And I'm not sure what we have up here at Hogadon, but it's my understanding that we do allow mountain bike riding up there, and we have trails that are up there. I was pretty impressed by, I haven't seen it, so I want to go up and look at Hogadon, but I was pretty impressed by the operation they had there, and they had the lifts open where they actually had brackets on the side of the lifts that they could carry bikes back up to the top, and I'm not sure whether we're doing that or not, but I just look at that operation itself and the amount of money. I mean, they've literally taken a ski hill that makes nothing at all in the off season, and it's a moneymaker. There's a lot of people that are into mountain biking and being able to take people up to the top of the lifts and let them ride down. They're paying the money, and so I just see an asset that we have that we could potentially be making money in the off season, if you will, of skiing. So I will go up and take a look at it, but I'd like to have further discussion on that at some point in time. I don't know if you can answer this, Mr. Manager, but apparently today they're over on Boots. They like painted all the curbs yellow over there, up in that area, and so I'm getting quite a bit from citizens that are asking if that was at the city's direction of painting that, or is that the homeowners association that did that? I don't know if you can answer that for me.
Mr. Mayor, the homeowners association has been talking to us about that possibility for quite some time now. And indeed, we did participate in a partnership with them to paint the portions of curbing that are not permitted for parking in company with the signs that are already there. So we shouldn't have any yellow curbing in areas where signs have not historically been prohibiting on-street parking in those areas.
Okay, so I'm gonna go out on a limb and make a comment here. So, and I know you weren't here when that subdivision was put in, but this is the drawback of allowing streets to be put in that are not of the regular width. And those were narrowed down streets, and it's been a problem ever since it's been built. And now they've gone to a point of having to paint curbs over there to show that it's no parking. So, I'm just hoping that for future developments that take place, that that's taken into consideration to have wide enough streets that people can actually park on the street and not be limited, so. And then my final thing was, you and I had discussions about the troopers. I don't know if that was something you wanted to discuss here tonight as to, or if we even have any information as to what they were looking for, and that's something that we can do a follow-up meeting with the gal I told you about, and maybe come back and have that discussion, but I don't know if you want to.
Mr. Mayor, I think an option for us to take would be to get that particular organizer in to visit with you and I and potentially Mr. Cortez and see what the root of the request would be from the Troopers Association, the organization, and bring it back to council for a larger, broader discussion. And I think that could be done in a work session fairly easily if that pleases the council.
Okay. And just to kind of inform everybody, I was contacted by a member of the Troopers Drum and Bugle Corps. They've been part of Casper forever. But they're doing a fundraising activity, and I believe they want the city to be involved in it. But really, for the details behind it and to how that would work out, I really don't have those details now. So I think maybe if we do set up a time to sit down and meet with them and get more details, then maybe we can bring that back to you. So, okay. Other than that, I don't have anything else. So meeting will be adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.